Hollywood film star James Stewart is now a captain in the Air Force. Interviewed in Britain, he had this to say about his wartime job.
I'm afraid I'm a little out of practice at this appearing before the camera. About 3 years ago, the first day I got into the Army, I was asked to make a statement for the news.
Many of the great stars of Hollywood and European films were veterans of World War II, becoming famous many years later. But a few were already big stars during the golden age of Hollywood, even before the war, and they also enlisted to serve in the cause of freedom. Some of the greatest names of the day left the screen and enlisted, and they were Ronald Reagan, Henry Fonda, Clark Gable, and Jimmy Stewart. All of these celebrities served as high-profile celebrity warriors, and a few served in very dangerous occupations. Most people in the United States readily know the names of Clark Gable and James Stewart from their films, without knowing that they were commissioned officers during the war. James Stewart stood out above all the rest. What did James Stewart actually do during the war? What made him stand out above most other celebrities? What was his life like in Hollywood after the war?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, a veteran of the United States Army and Marine Corps, former history professor, book author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
James Maitland Stewart was born on May 20th, 1908 in Indiana, Pennsylvania, where he grew up with his two younger sisters, Virginia and Mary. His mother was Elizabeth Ruth Stewart, and his father was Alexander Maitland Stewart, who owned a general store, started by his grandfather, J.M. Hardware Company. Stewart attended Indiana Normal School, Mercersburg Academy, and Princeton University, graduating in 1932 with a degree in architecture. Because it was the Great Depression, Stewart found work was very hard to find, but he did get a job as a setup man for the Falmouth Players on Broadway. He managed to start acting on stage in small parts and became better known as a good actor. And then Hollywood came calling in 1935. Stewart then signed a contract with MGM Studios, which started a legendary film career. During this time, he made 21 feature films alongside Ginger Rogers, Clark Gable, and Jean Harlow, among others. Few occupations were more dangerous than serving in the U.S. Army Air Corps over Europe, and James Stewart volunteered for such duty. His legend as an actor began before the war, and his legacy as a combat leader lasted long after the war. The family had a long and distinguished military tradition. His third great-grandfather, Fergus Moorhead, served in the American Revolution. His maternal grandfather was a Union general in the Civil War. His father, Alex, had served in both the Spanish-American War and World War I. Stewart earned his private and commercial pilot's license, and, in his own words, "Charles Lindbergh inspired me, like most young men of that time, as well as Eddie Rickenbacker in the First World War and Amelia Earhart. I wanted to fly, so I did." Stewart tried to enlist in the U.S. Army Air Corps in November 1940, but he was rejected for low weight compared to his height of 6 foot 3 inches. When the U.S. entered World War II after first being rejected, he enlisted again in February 1941. As an experienced pilot, he reported for induction as a private in the Air Corps on March 22, 1941, at age 33. Too old for aviation cadet training, so he applied for an Air Corps commission, both as a college graduate and a licensed commercial pilot. Stewart received his commission as a second lieutenant on January 1, 1942. Due to his experience, he spent over a year training pilots at Kirtland Army Airfield in Albuquerque, New Mexico, before his request was approved to go to England. He was a qualified B-17 and a B-24 pilot, and in 1943, November, he arrived in England as a captain and part of the 445th Bombardment Group, flying B-24 Liberators, based initially at RAF Tivenham, then relocating to RAF Old Buckingham in East Anglia. He was briefed on and well aware of the two worst days in Air Corps history, the August 17th and October 1943 missions to Schweinfurt and Regensburg, which almost saw Congress defund the bombing program. Those missions cost the 8th Air Force 60 B-17s and over 550 men on the first mission, and 60 B-17s shot down, with another 17 scrapped and losing over 600 men on the second mission. Morale took a dive as a result, but Stewart understood how to raise morale. Stewart volunteered to fly as often as he could, and he was a taskmaster, grilling every crew member of his crew on their job, skills, and throwing out hypothetical situations to see what their corrective action would be. Stewart knew his bomber inside and out. He wanted to ensure each man had equal knowledge because all of their lives depended on it. One time, one of his crews had not been paid for over a month, and Stewart found out about it. He took them to the pay officer and instructed the lieutenant handling payroll that if these men were not paid within 30 minutes, he would find himself transferred to the infantry. The men were paid on the spot. Stewart volunteered to fly the December 24th Christmas Eve mission to Calais, France, to hit the German V-1 rocket launching sites. Intelligence stated that flak and fighters would be heavy. Some of Germany's best fighter pilots were there and were well known. Stewart then went to his crew and told them that this would be a low-level mission, 12,000 feet, not 25,000, and he would only take volunteers. He was not ordering anyone on this very dangerous mission. His men were dedicated to him, and they all volunteered. The mission was a great success, as the estimated 12 launchers were destroyed along with their V-1 flying bombs. Stewart was promoted to major following the mission on January 7, 1944, to Ludwigshafen, Germany. As the leader of the 445th Bombardment Group, he realized that the 2nd Division commander made a navigational error and was off course by 30 degrees, and Stewart knew it. But rather than adjust to the proper compass heading and reduce the effectiveness of the formation safety, he made the call to stay with his leader. That mistake by the leader would be expensive, because once they left Ludwigshafen, at 28 miles south of Paris, over 60 German fighters, Bf-109s and FW-190s, carved into the B-24 formations. The lead element was torn apart, bombers going down, parachutes dotting the sky. Stewart kept his formation together and tight in their box and brought all 48 of the air-cruising aircraft home. The unit morale was high. He used his celebrity and rank to hold dances for the younger officers and the local English women, sometimes playing piano himself. He did some radio broadcasts for the war effort, and this was when he became friends with Pamela Churchill, who was Winston's daughter-in-law at that time. Pamela said during her interview, "James was such a gentleman, and he was really adored by his men, even though he was a hard commander. They saw him as fair. It was not beyond him to make recommendations for medals and promotions for those he thought were deserving." Stewart earned a reputation as a good officer and leader, and the nickname Lucky Jimmy, because he always brought his crews back home, an almost impossible feat to achieve. His leadership style was unique to his personality, and he dealt with disciplinary problems how he saw fit. When he entered the hut of one of his crews, he discovered a stolen beer keg, a serious infraction. He then proceeded to have beer with the men, then asked if they knew anything about a keg being stolen from the officers' mess. The men maintained their ignorance. Stewart and the men finished the beer, and he said, "I'm sure that nothing like this will happen again." He left. There was no punishment, and he kept his silence, but the men never stole another keg. Stewart was flying more missions than almost any other officer of his rank, sharing the dangers, even on the deeper raids into Germany as far as Berlin. Leading by example, sharing the minus 20-degree temperatures or colder, flak and fighters, is the best way to earn a man's respect, despite his rank. Stewart earned it in spades. There was some concern from others that Stewart was taking too many chances, even though he had only flown 12 missions with the 445th. He was an American icon, a hero to many, and it was considered a disaster for the war effort and morale back home if he were killed or captured. It was decided that he should be reassigned, which would remove him from flying duties, so he was transferred to the 453rd Bombardment Group in March, following the March 22nd mission to Berlin. He became the new operations officer for the 453rd and proved to be one of the best mission planners in the Air Service. But there was another reason Stewart was sent there. Losses had been high, and morale was low, so it was believed that his magic of raising morale would not hurt. But if the brass thought that his new job would ground him, they were wrong. In May, Stewart was briefed on the coming D-Day landings in Normandy and the preparatory bombing that would lead up to the amphibious invasion. He was also promoted to lieutenant colonel the day before the invasion. Stewart had his 453rd bombers busy softening up German positions before and for 9 days after the landings, and in June, they flew 33 missions, losing only 4 bombers. For his service as deputy commander of the 2nd Bombardment Wing, he was awarded 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 3 Air Medals, and the Croix de Guerre with Palm by France. Near the end of his World War II service in Europe, he was promoted to full colonel on March 29, 1945, in the Army Air Corps. He had been decorated by Britain, France, and the United States for his service and 20 combat missions he flew over Germany. One of his last and least appealing duties before returning home was presiding over the courts-martial in June 1945 of a pilot, First Lieutenant William Sencock, and his navigator, First Lieutenant Theodore Balides, who accidentally bombed Zurich, Switzerland. They were eventually found not guilty due to faulty navigational equipment. Stewart often came into contact with his almost equally famous superiors, such as Generals James H. Doolittle, Curtis E. LeMay, Carl Spaatz, and others. All thought him a most reliable and competent officer. The men who served under Stewart always recalled him as never displaying fear, always calm and in control. He never raised his voice, even during flak or fighter attacks. Watching fellow bomber crews and their aircraft blown apart, men falling to their deaths, and enemy fighters tearing up a bomber and survivors bailing out, often took their toll of those men who witnessed such events. Keeping men focused, calm, and in control during such intense battle is the greatest challenge of any leader. Stewart himself explained his method of leadership under fire. Fear is an insidious and deadly thing. It can warp judgment, freeze reflexes, breeds mistakes. Worse, it is contagious. I knew that my own fear, if not checked, could infect my crew members, and I could feel it growing within me. During my interview, he said, "You have to know your men. You have to see the ones who are close to the edge and those with a lot of missions. Despite being seasoned, they also had a lot of things to try and forget. Not easy. You must be in total control and let them know that they will be all right, that you are with them. You will not abandon them. You are there until it's over. And if you are a self-assured leader, you will see the positive results. My only fear was in failing my men. They counted on me." But Stewart's fame extended far beyond the United States or Great Britain. He was also a big star in Europe. But one little-known fact that I shared with him was the fact that he and Clark Gable both had bounties on their heads. The German pilot who shot either of them down would get 100,000 Reichsmarks. This was because the Luftwaffe Commander-in-Chief Hermann Goering and many of the older, old-school pilots were also fans of American films, and Stewart, being a well-known actor as well as a pilot, was of great interest. Hitler's mistress, Eva Braun's favorite film was Gone with the Wind, and her favorite actor was Clark Gable. Arthur Axmann, the leader of the Hitler Youth, Lieutenant General Hans Bauer, a World War I ace and Hitler's personal pilot and possibly his best friend, actress and director Leni Riefenstahl, as well as others, admired the two men and their work in film. They all knew of the great interest in both Gable and Stewart. SS Lieutenant General Karl Wolff said, Hitler would have liked either or even both men captured, just to meet with them. He did not wish them harm, and he thought that it would be good for German morale. Even propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda were great fans of both men, especially Clark Gable. Stewart was also one of the 12 founders of the Air Force Association in October 1945, and he transferred to the United States Air Force Reserve after the Army Air Force became an independent branch in 1947. During active duty periods, he served with the Strategic Air Command and completed transition training as a pilot on the B-47 and B-52. In 1948, he attended a party at his friend's house, fellow actor Gary Cooper, when he met Gloria Hattrick McLean. They were married a year later, and they had twin daughters, Kelly and Judy, along with Gloria's 2 sons from a previous marriage, Michael and Ronald. Tragedy struck when Ronald was killed in the Vietnam War on June 8, 1969, at the age of 24 while serving as a lieutenant in the Marine Corps. Stewart wanted to return to making movies, but he did not want to do any war films, feeling that the nation had had enough of that. And he wanted to do comedies. He also let it be known that when he arrived back home to see his parents, he did not want the parade and fanfare that was planned. He just wanted to become an average American citizen and relax. He stayed current with his flying. He bought a twin-engine Beech Bonanza for personal use and transitioned into the newer heavy bombers for the Air Force. On July 23, 1959, Stewart was promoted to Brigadier General, becoming the highest-ranking actor in American military history. During the Vietnam War, he flew as a non-duty observer on a B-52 on an arc flight raid, a bombing mission that took place in February 1966. Stewart served for 27 years and retired from the Air Force on May 31, 1968, receiving the Air Force Distinguished Service Medal. Stewart appeared in 88 films and television shows, including westerns, musicals, suspense thrillers, military and war films, action films, family films, biographies, and comedies. Stewart became a best-selling author and published a book of poetry and was an Academy Award Lifetime Achievement recipient. He was also awarded the Golden Globe, Cecil B. DeMille, and American Film Institute Awards for Lifetime Achievement. President Reagan awarded him the Medal of Freedom. When his wife Gloria died in 1994, just a few months after my interview with him, Stewart retired from public life, and he truly loved her and missed her terribly. One thing he said to me that I will share with the readers and the viewers: if you find that one right person, you will complete your life. Cherish it and protect it. There is no greater experience in life. On June 25, 1997, a thrombosis formed in his right leg, leading to a pulmonary embolism a week later. James Stewart died of a heart attack caused by the embolism at the age of 89, surrounded by his children at his home in Beverly Hills on July 2, 1997. More than 3,000 mourners attended his memorial service, including Carol Burnett, Bob Hope, and Robert Stack, to name a few. Brigadier General James M. Stewart, USAF, retired, was buried with full military honors at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. He was truly a quiet hero and one of the best representatives of what we call the greatest generation today. He was also a decent man and a great patriotic American.
Now I have my own outfit, the Heavy Bombardment Group, so we are very proud to be here. And we're going to do our best to be useful as soldiers of the United States Army. Thank you.
We at Forgotten History have profiled several celebrities, mostly actors who served during times of armed conflict, especially in World War II. But there were men who served in the military and in other wars whose service is not well known, but they are famous. One was a master of deception, blending on screen as one of television's most memorable villains. Yet behind the scenes, Sorrell Booke led a double life far more thrilling than any role he played. He worked in covert operations, using his skills in communication and understanding of human behavior to assist in sensitive tasks. Though the details of his service are shrouded in secrecy, it is said that his military experience helped him develop a keen understanding of strategy and deception, skills that would later serve him well in his career as an actor, especially when portraying complex characters. From the iconic Dukes of Hazzard to covert operations for the U.S. government, this actor had a secret life that would shock even the most hardened spies. Booke's character, Boss Hogg, became one of the most celebrated personalities in TV history, brought to life by a man who was a born actor, entertainer, and a genuine American hero whose many achievements in the military are still classified. But what if the greatest role he ever played was as secret agent? Today we uncover the hidden life of Sorrell Booke, actor, spy, and master of espionage. Who was Sorrell Booke? What did he do? Why was his work so classified? How did he evolve from a counterintelligence operative to actor?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
Sorrell Booke was born on January 4, 1930, in Buffalo, New York, the son of a local doctor. As a child, his family encouraged him to entertain relatives by doing impressions of famous celebrities and telling jokes, often writing his own scripts, which he sent to radio stations. He won a radio contest for mimicking the voice of Adolf Hitler and was a regular voice actor on local radio stations WGR and WEBR. He was an excellent student and graduated from Bennett High School as valedictorian of the class of 1946 at age 16. Booke's hard work paid off and evolved into a short-lived professional radio and stage career after high school, frequently appearing in dramatic theater and radio productions. He continued working in radio, earning money for college. In fact, he was a gifted genius who entered Columbia University at age 16, earning his Bachelor of Arts degree at age 19. While at Columbia, he performed in Shakespearean plays in Columbia's Drama Club. In a campus variety show, he played Senator Cottonmouth, portraying a Southern politician. His ability to use perfect accents and imitate actual people amazed his family and fellow students. After graduating from Columbia, he attended Yale University and joined the Skull and Bones Society, earning his Master of Fine Arts degree studying theater and languages. His natural ability at linguistics allowed him to fully master 5 foreign languages fluently, with hardly a trace of an accent, such as French, Japanese, Spanish, Russian, and Italian. He was also conversationally capable in Arabic, Mandarin Chinese, Dutch, Persian, Polish, Swedish, and German. Since the USA still had mandatory military service, Booke was approached by the CIA and U.S. Army due to his skills. Booke decided that the Army would be a better option as it was only a 2-year commitment, and he was commissioned as a second lieutenant and joined military intelligence. During the Korean War, Booke was interviewed and brought into the highly selective and secretive counterintelligence world, the Army's Counterintelligence Corps, where his mastery of languages served him well. Often working with the CIA in Korea, the CIC managed many covert operations which are still classified, and this is where his service gets very murky. The CIC and CIA oversaw interrogations of North Korean and Chinese prisoners of war, and this was where Booke would have flourished. In addition, it is known that there were Soviet advisors and pilots supporting the North Korean and Chinese communists. However, the military intelligence branches, the CIA and NSA and other intelligence gathering organizations did not communicate well with each other. This gap in unified command intelligence gathering and the failure to confirm reliable information in a timely manner was what really hindered American and UN operations. Basically, Allied forces could only respond to communist actions, not anticipate them, and that had to be changed. Having a fluent Russian and Chinese-speaking officer would have made Booke a remarkably high-valued interrogator. A late friend of mine, former CIC agent Sherman Delmage, knew Booke's background and had met him a couple of times in the 1960s and 1970s. According to Delmage, during my interview with him in 1993, there is no way that he would not have been deeply involved in the interrogation of enemy prisoners, especially officers. I heard that a few Russians had been caught, as well as a lot of Chinese, but I cannot confirm the Russians. He would have been in his element, especially with his speaking Russian and Mandarin. I can bet you a lot of that is still classified. During my interviews with retired U.S. Army General Matthew Ridgway many years ago, he mentioned the intelligence work that was being done in Korea. Although he did not know Sorrell Booke and was not involved in that type of work, he said, "Some of the most sensitive work was gathering intelligence, and it was difficult. It was not like in World War II, where we had some native Japanese, Italian, and German speakers who were invaluable in helping collect information. But Chinese and Russian, well, that is a separate set of challenges, as both were involved with the North Koreans." After the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir, and see our video on the Frozen Army, 1,245 Chinese prisoners were captured by the end of December 1950. Many were former supporters of the nationalist Chinese government under Chiang Kai-shek, who had been captured and re-educated, but many defected the first chance they had. From January to April 1951, when General Matthew Ridgway replaced MacArthur as the 8th Army commander, he changed the strategic complexion and allowed his field commanders the freedom to devise their own tactics. This included psychological warfare, and his methods successfully turned around the war in Korea. The UN forces repelled the Chinese Fourth Offensive and launched a counteroffensive. During the intense fighting, more Chinese prisoners were captured. Taking great risks, many defectors escaped and surrendered to the UN troops, including some of the future anti-communist POW leaders. Ridgway oversaw the hiring of more than 70 interpreters from Taiwan, augmented by American, Chinese, and Korean speakers who oversaw interrogations. President Truman then authorized the expansion of the prisoner indoctrination program to include Chinese POWs who went through intense interrogations. Part of the propaganda targeting the Chinese were pamphlets dropped over the lines, written in Mandarin, and loudspeaker broadcast in that language as well as Korean. Signals intelligence was less effective than human intelligence back then, which was just being developed, and was where Booke and his CIC agents came into play. As a result of bad leadership, poor logistics, lack of coordination, and incredible losses, Chinese General Peng Dui's general headquarters, right down to the 3rd Army Group and even down to the 60th Army and the 180th Division, saw massive defections. Disillusioned, disaffected, starving, and morally broken soldiers were a goldmine of information, and their misery was exploited to the UN's advantage. In over 3 months, 15,510 Communist Chinese soldiers were captured, which was more than 70% of the 21,074 Chinese prisoners captured during the entire war, and many of these were defectors. Many were willing defectors who gave up military information. The higher the rank of the POW, the more attention they received from Booke and the other CIC interrogators. The problem was separating POWs from those true defectors from the communist infiltrators, and this is where the CIC work became deeply involved, and language skills as well as trained interrogators were needed. Booke was just what they needed. Some CIC men, as well as Taiwanese and South Korean agents, would wear North Korean or Chinese uniforms, be brought into the POW camps, establish relationships with the other prisoners, and gather intelligence. This information would be compared to the POW's formal interviews, checking for any inconsistencies. Chinese anti-communist prisoners in the prison camps in Pusan and on Koje Island contained more than 150,000 Chinese and North Korean POWs. Unlike the North Korean prisoners, whose military organization remained largely intact, the Chinese communist officers sought to hide their identities to avoid interrogation by G2, CIC, and others, and any persecution by the U.S. Army. Chinese defectors, Usually, lower-ranking soldiers who were properly vetted by CIC and CIA interrogators served as trustees, cooperating with G2 and CIC to identify communist officers for interrogation and helping prison authorities arrest communist troublemakers. The approved implementation of the Civil Information and Education Program, basically a re-education project started in August 1952, relied upon educated anti-communist prisoners as the primary instructors. Chinese anti-communist POWs combined communist methods of thought control and mandatory participation with nationalist methods of physical punishment. They established control over the two largest Chinese compounds, 72 and 76, with a combined population of more than 16,000. One result was the hundreds of Chinese and North Korean prisoners who were turned into Allied agents. Between 1951 and early 1954, several hundred Chinese prisoners just disappeared from prison camps and were declared to have escaped. In fact, they had been drafted by a U.S. military intelligence unit of the Far East Command Liaison Detachment, Korea, the 8240th Army Unit, part of the Counterintelligence Corps. After training, they infiltrated back into China and North Korea by air, by sea, or by land, and once their missions were completed, they had to return to the Allied side on foot. More than 200 of these men were killed or captured during their missions, and some of the captured men were executed by the communists, which basically destroyed the best educated and most committed Chinese anti-communist prisoners turned into assets. Several of the survivors were interviewed, with 70 of them going to Taiwan. Their debriefings garnered intelligence, but also detailed their narrow escapes from death and the loss of their comrades. Booke and the CIC handled these interrogations as well. The success of Booke and his fellow CIC, CIA, and G2 officials resulted in an amazing event. In the anti-communist controlled compounds 72 and 86, more than 85% of the 16,000 prisoners refused repatriation back to China, and they provided a lot of information. Anti-communist Chinese soldiers were released to Taiwan in January 1954, with 12 Chinese and 76 Korean prisoners choosing neutral nations, and most went to India and a couple went to Argentina. Their contact with the Americans who treated them well changed their ideology. Many became very cooperative. A large part of this information gathering was trying to learn the locations and fates of Allied missing in action and those held as POWs in Korea and in China. According to Ridgway, I did not want any missing men unaccounted for if at all possible, and we had very limited information on where our soldiers were being held and if they were even alive. This is critical information. The interrogations did reveal many of the prison camps in China and North Korea, which were marked on maps, and this information was used during the 1953 peace talks. Having the knowledge of Allied POWs, conditions, those who died, and their camp locations in North Korea and China came as a great surprise to the communists who had no intention of releasing anyone. Also of interest, it was well known, although not reported, that Soviet advisors and pilots were supporting the Chinese and North Koreans, but having proof was hard to get unless they captured a Soviet soldier or pilot. Through interrogation with a few North Korean and Chinese pilots who flew with the Russians, and they were shot down themselves, this was confirmed. The United Nations Command under U.S. authorization devised Operation Moolah, offering a reward of $100,000 and political asylum, hoping a MiG pilot would defect to South Korea with a MiG-15 for testing. North Korean pilot Lieutenant No Kum-sok eventually defected in September 1953 and claimed to be unaware of the reward, giving the U.S. Air Force a fully operational MiG-15 for testing, which was critical to air intelligence. No Kum-sok was more than willing to discuss the Soviets they flew with as well as the Chinese and seemed unhesitant in his debriefings, and CIC along with the CIA handled these. He confirmed the presence of Russian pilots. In fact, although the Soviet Union never acknowledged its participation in the conflict, the U.S. did have the evidence. Soviet pilots, though forbidden from communicating in any language other than basic Korean, often spoke Russian when stressed or when swearing, or in combat. These communications proved Soviet involvement as they were captured by military intelligence, and the audio would be translated by CIC Russian speakers, such as Booke. After his service was over, Booke acted off-Broadway in a variety of shows, until he made his Broadway debut in 1956 in Michael Redgrave's production of The Sleeping Prince. Other roles and performances followed, leading to a career in film and television. All told, he had 171 film and TV credits during his career. In 1958, he married Miranda Knickerbocker, and they had 2 children, Alexandra and Nicholas. They divorced in 1973, but Booke was in high demand as a character actor, and he landed roles in dozens of the most popular TV shows from the 1950s to the 1980s. Such TV shows were Gunsmoke, Cannon, Ironside, Route 66, Hawaii Five-0, The Rockford Files, Full House, The Guiding Light, Black Sheep Squadron, The Patty Duke Show, 12 O'Clock High, Dr. Kildare, MASH, All in the Family, Soap, Good Times, Columbo, but he still had film roles. But it was the Dukes of Hazzard that made him a legend, and he copied Boss Hogg's American Southern drawl from listening to U.S. Senators Sam Ervin and Strom Thurmond, whom he thought were clowns. Although personally he believed that his Boss Hogg character was a despicable person, he still enjoyed meeting fans of the show, and he was always friendly. Booke wanted to appear like a well-fed, pompous Southern Huey Long type of character, so he wore a padded suit under his trademark white business suit, making him look overweight, and he adopted a distinctive waddle or duck walk to add to the character. According to co-star John Schneider, regarding the taping of the first season of The Dukes of Hazzard, in one episode, Booke and guest star Andrew Robinson, who also spoke Japanese, played a trick on James Best, who played Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane. Booke and Robinson spoke all of their dialogue in a scene in Japanese, totally confusing Best. Once on the set, a group of Japanese tourists arrived, and Booke took over as the tour guide, speaking to them in Japanese. He also smoked cigars on the set as part of his character, but while filming, he usually smoked cigarettes. He also worked as a voice actor in the 1980s and early 1990s for voiceovers and animated children's shows and cartoons such as Scooby-Doo. A talented classical musician as well, he was a guest conductor at the Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra. Sorrell Booke was a gifted carpenter and self-trained handyman, and he was also a very frugal person with a good business head. He would buy and personally restore rundown houses and then flip them for a profit. Despite being one of TV's biggest stars, he lived in a modest home in Los Angeles, not in Beverly Hills, Bel Air, or Malibu, and he grew his own vegetables, did his own landscaping and gardening. On February 11, 1994, Sorrell Booke died of colorectal cancer in Sherman Oaks, California, just after his 64th birthday, and was buried at the Jewish cemetery, Hillside Memorial Park Cemetery in Culver City, California. His tombstone bears the inscription, "Beloved Father, Grandfather, Brother, and Boss," in tribute to his role as the character Boss Hogg, which cemented his legacy as a beloved and legendary actor.
Boot camp. For generations of Marines, it's been the forge, the place where boys and girls are broken down and rebuilt into something harder than steel. It's chaos, order, fear, and pride, all rolled into one. And at the center of it stands a single figure, the drill instructor. Their voice is law, their presence, absolute. Every Marine remembers the first time they locked eyes with their drill instructor. Because in that moment, you realize this isn't a movie. This is the real thing. Over the years, Hollywood tried to capture that intensity, the discipline, the terror, the transformation. But only once did they ever get it right. Because the man they put in front of the camera didn't have to act. He'd already lived it. His name was Ermey, and he became the face, the voice, and the spirit of the United States Marine Corps. To millions who never served a day in uniform. But who was he before Hollywood found him? And how did one Marine turn a lifetime of discipline into cinematic legend? Let's try and find out.
Hello, I'm Mike Droberg, Marine Corps veteran and filmmaker, and we will try to answer these questions on today's episode of Forgotten History.
Ermey was born on March 24, 1944, in Emporia, Kansas, but grew up in the small farming town of Zillow, Washington. Life there was simple, hard, and honest, the kind that either tames you or toughens you. For young Ermey, it did the latter. By his teenage years, he developed a reputation as a handful, loud, restless, and constantly testing limits. He tore up back roads in fast cars, got into fights, and was arrested more than once for vandalism and reckless driving. Before long, the local sheriff knew him by name. At 17, after yet another run-in with the law, a judge finally gave him an ultimatum: spend time in jail or enlist in the military. Ermey didn't hesitate. He chose the Marines, and it changed everything. He enlisted in 1961 and was sent to Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego. The transformation was immediate. The wild teenager who once clashed with authority was suddenly surrounded by it and thrived. The discipline, the order, the sense of purpose, it all stuck. After training, he served as an aircraft mechanic and later earned a billet as a drill instructor, one of the toughest, most respected jobs in the Corps. He turned that same rebellious fire into command presence, molding recruits into Marines. In 1968, he deployed to Vietnam with the Marine Wing Support Squadron 17 stationed at Durning, keeping aircraft operational under the strain of war. He was part of the machine that made those missions possible: long hours, constant pressure, and the unrelenting tempo of the combat zone. Ermey served more than a decade in uniform, rising to the rank of staff sergeant. But years of hard service and injuries eventually took their toll. In 1972, he was medically discharged, an ending that hit him harder than he expected. He said that leaving the Marines felt like losing family, but the discipline and intensity of the Corps had burned into him and it would never fade. In fact, it was about to take him somewhere no Marine drill instructor had ever gone, straight into Hollywood history. After leaving the Corps, Ermey struggled to find his footing in civilian life. Like many veterans, he missed the structure, the camaraderie, and the mission. So he followed a path that few would have expected. He moved overseas, settling in the Philippines. At first, it was just a change of scenery, but the country's growing film industry, particularly its reputation for hosting war movies, soon caught his attention. He enrolled in the University of Manila on a GI Bill, studying criminology and drama. That combination might sound odd, but for Ermey, it made sense. He wanted to understand people, what drove them, what broke them, and performing gave him an outlet for the intensity he once used on the drill field. His first break came when director Francis Ford Coppola began filming Apocalypse Now in 1976. Ermey was hired as a military technical advisor, responsible for keeping the actors in line and making the chaos of the Vietnam War look authentic. It didn't take long for people on set to realize that Ermey wasn't just another consultant, he was the real deal. Cast and crew members later recalled that he commanded the same authority off-screen that he once had in boot camp. When he spoke, people snapped to attention. When he gave orders, extras moved like Marines. His energy was contagious, and it got him noticed. Soon, small acting roles followed. He appeared in Apocalypse Now as a helicopter pilot, then landed a few minor parts in low-budget films throughout the late 1970s and early 1980s. There were small steps, but they were building towards something much bigger. Then, in 1986, Stanley Kubrick began production of Full Metal Jacket. Ermey was hired to train the actors playing recruits, to shape them into believable Marines. But when Kubrick saw footage of Ermey barking real drill commands between takes, he realized no actor could match his authenticity. The consultant had just earned himself the most iconic role of his life. During the filming of Full Metal Jacket, Ermey insisted on complete realism. He drilled the young actors like real recruits, 10-hour days of marching, shouting, and discipline. The result was tension, exhaustion, and fear. Exactly what Kubrick wanted on screen. More than half of Ermey's lines were improvised, drawn from his own years on the drill field. Phrases like, "What's your major malfunction?" "You will not laugh, you will not cry," came directly from his experience shaping Marines. His rhythm, timing, and control turned into something unforgettable. Critics and audiences were stunned. His portrayal of Gunnery Sergeant Hartman became one of cinema's most iconic military performances, terrifying, magnetic, and strangely honorable. For many Marines, watching Full Metal Jacket felt like watching boot camp all over again. The performance earned him a Golden Globe nomination for Best Supporting Actor. But for Ermey, the recognition wasn't about fame. He saw it as a chance to represent the Corps with pride. He often said, "I'm not an actor, I'm just a Marine who happens to play one." His voice, his bearing, his command presence, they all became part of pop culture. From late night shows to video games and commercials, the gunny's voice could cut through noise like a rifle report. And in every appearance, he carried that same respect for the uniform and the Marines who wore it. For R. Lee Ermey, Full Metal Jacket wasn't just a role. It was a salute to the Corps that made him who he was. He could have coasted on that single performance. Instead, he worked harder than ever. Hollywood quickly realized that when they needed authenticity, the real sound, look, and attitude of a Marine, they called a gunny. Ermey went on to appear in more than 60 films and television projects. He played authority figures, sergeants, sheriffs, and soldiers, roles that fit like a uniform. His appearances in Mississippi Burning, Seven, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake showed his range, while his voice acting in Toy Soldier introduced him to a new generation. Even as a plastic toy soldier, his delivery was unmistakable. But Ermey wasn't content with scripted lines. In 2002, he began hosting Mail Call on the History Channel, a show that allowed him to do what he loved most: educate, entertain, and share traditions of the military. Standing in front of tanks, aircraft, and historical weapons, he explained the tools of war with the same booming enthusiasm he once used on recruits. Later, he hosted Lock and Load and Gunny Time, deepening his reputation as America's favorite Marine. That same year, the Marine Corps honored him with something extraordinary, an honorary promotion to Gunnery Sergeant. It was a rank he had lived up to in spirit for decades, and the recognition meant more to him than any film award ever could. And off camera, Ermey dedicated himself to supporting veterans. He traveled to bases, hospitals, and memorial events, shaking hands with Marines and thanking them for their service. He was known for his generosity, his humor, and his unshakable pride in the Corps. Even as his health began to decline, he never slowed down. He continued appearing at Marine Corps balls and public events, often closing his speeches with the same message: once a Marine, always a Marine. On April 15, 2018, Ermey passed away from complications of pneumonia at the age of 74. News of his death spread quickly through both Hollywood and the military community. For Marines, it felt personal. They hadn't just lost a familiar face, they'd lost one of their own. Tributes poured in from across the world. the Marine Corps issued an official statement honoring his decades of service and dedication. Fans left messages on his social media pages, thanking him for inspiring them to enlist or for representing the Corps with dignity. Many said that for years, when they thought of a Marine, they pictured the gunny. He was laid to rest with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery, a fitting resting place for a man who never stopped serving. Today, R. Lee Ermey's voice still echoes in movies, in history programs, and in the memories of Marines who grew up watching him. His legacy isn't measured in film credits or awards, but in respect he earned from men and women who understood exactly what he stood for. He once said, "I may have retired from the Marine Corps, but the Marine Corps will never retire from me." And for millions who watch him turn discipline to art, that statement still holds true. R. Lee Ermey was more than a performer. He embodied what it meant to serve with pride, to lead by example, and to live as a Marine until the very end. Let us know your thoughts on R. Lee Ermey in the comments below.
Before he was Horatio Hornblower, terrified audiences as Dracula, commanded the White Council as Saruman in the Lord of the Rings movie franchise, or fought Jedi as Count Dooku, his career encompassed an amazing 280 acting roles, while also becoming the actor with the most on-screen deaths in history. But Sir Christopher Lee was not just an actor. He was a true war hero, not becoming a global celebrity until after his military service, with much of his work still classified to this day as he waged a very personal, real, and very secret war across North Africa and Europe. His career on stage and in cinema is legendary, but his life before the glamour of entertainment was far more dangerous than any of the amazing characters he played. He was the real deal. Who was Christopher Lee? What was his background? What did he do during World War II? How did that experience prepare him for a career in film?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
Christopher Frank Carandini Lee was born on May 27, 1922 in London, and was of noble ancestry, and he had a refined manner. And few would have guessed that the future horror and action film legendary wartime intelligence officer, whose missions remain shrouded in secrecy to this day, had such a background. He was the son of Lieutenant Colonel Geoffrey Trollope Lee of the 60th King's Royal Rifle Corps, and his wife Countess Estelle Marie, the former Estelle Carandini di Sarzano. His mother's family were given the right to bear the coat of arms of the Holy Roman Empire by Emperor Frederick Barbarossa in the 12th century. Christopher had an older sister, Zandra, and a younger brother, Nicholas. Their father had fought in the Second Anglo-Boer War and First World War with some distinction. Their parents divorced when Christopher was 6 years old. Lee's maternal great-grandfather was an Italian, Jerome Carandini, the Marquis of Sarzano, whose wife, Lee's great-grandmother, was the English-born opera singer Marie Carandini. Christopher and his sister went with their mother and lived in Switzerland, where he attended the exclusive Miss Fisher's Academy. This was where he played his first role as Rumpelstiltskin in a school play. When the family returned to London, Lee attended the exclusive Wagner School in Queensgate, and his mother then married Harcourt George St. Croix Rose, a banker who was the uncle of future James Bond writer Ian Fleming, who was Lee's step-cousin. When the family moved to Fulham, they lived next door to actor Eric Maturin, where Lee met the exiled Prince Felix Felixovich Yusupov, who was also the Count Sumarakov-Elston, and also met Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, the two men who killed the Mad Monk Grigory Rasputin on December 30th, 1916, and please see our video on him. Ironically, Lee would play Rasputin many years later, and he brought the story of those events with him. At age 9, Lee was sent to the Summerfields School in Oxford, one of the most exclusive private schools in England, which was a preparatory education that would serve him well later when he attended Wellington College, where he won scholarships studying ancient Greek and Latin. However, when he was 17 and in his third year at Wellington, during the summer term of 1939, his stepfather had gone bankrupt, so tuition was not possible. His mother and stepfather separated, and Lee left college to find work. Lee was sent to the French Riviera with his sister on a short vacation over the summer, and he stopped briefly in Paris, and he stayed with the journalist Webb Miller, a friend of his stepfather's. While there, he witnessed the execution of Eugen Weidmann by guillotine, which was the last public execution in France. In Menton, he stayed with the exiled noble Russian Mazarov family for a while before returning to London, taking a job as a mail clerk for the United States lines. Britain and France had declared war on Germany in September 1939, and young men were being mobilized. But when the Soviet Union invaded Finland that November, Lee and other young men left to join the Finnish army as volunteers. Lee learned shooting skills, but not being able to ski, he was kept on guard duty, which he admitted probably saved his life. Lee did not last long, and after 2 weeks, he returned to London, where he resumed his old job. When his father died on March 12, 1941, with his draft notice coming, he decided to enlist in the Royal Air Force, not wanting to join the Army. He passed the required exams and was sent to South Africa and then Rhodesia for primary flight training on tiger moths. But a damaged optic nerve caused dizziness, so he was no longer maintained as a pilot candidate. Undeterred, he joined RAF intelligence, and with his fluency in French, Italian, and German, speaking 5 languages in total fluently, and with a good working knowledge of 3 other languages, he was welcomed aboard. He was sent to Egypt in 1942 for intelligence work attached to No. 205 Group RAF. Then he was commissioned in January 1943 and attached to No. 260 Squadron RAF. As the Allies advanced into Tunisia, Lee was almost killed when the squadron's airfield was bombed. Lee later went to Malta and then Sicily, where he contracted malaria for the 6th time in 1 year, and after returning from the hospital, he found the unit lacking mail for weeks, no news on the war, and lack of alcoholic beverages was bordering on mutiny. Lee managed to prevent a revolt by sharing information that he had, which impressed his commander. When the unit was based in Foggia after the invasion of Italy, Lee was sent to the army, where he worked mostly with the Gurkhas at the Battle of Monte Cassino, assigned to the 8th Indian Infantry Division, and they saw intense combat. Following the break in the fighting, he took a few days' leave in Naples, where he climbed the live volcano Mount Vesuvius, which then erupted 3 days later. Upon his return to his duties, which included translating documents, interrogating prisoners, and supporting Allied missions behind enemy lines, he had a relapse of malaria. After this, Lee was quietly attached to the Special Operations Executive, or SOE, as well as the SAS, which was Churchill's Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, a clandestine group responsible for sabotage, espionage, and irregular warfare in Nazi-occupied Europe. During this time, he performed liaison and intelligence work, often behind enemy lines. His unit was involved in tracking German troop movements, coordinating resistance forces, setting ambushes, organizing supply drops, document forging, assassinations, kidnapping, and preparing airfields and drop zones for Allied landings. To this day, many of Lee's missions remain classified, which is not unusual. When asked about his war record, Lee would only say, "I've seen many terrible things. I was attached to the SAS from time to time, but we are forbidden to discuss operations. Let's just say that I was in Special Forces and leave it at that." Lee volunteered for the most dangerous and secretive missions, even after it became known that Adolf Hitler had issued his Kommandobefehl, or commando order, which stated all British commandos captured were not to be treated as POWs under the Geneva Convention. They were to be executed. As the Allies closed in on Germany, Lee was among the first personnel to enter Nazi concentration camps. He witnessed firsthand the horrors at Dachau, an experience that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He later assisted in tracking down Nazi war criminals. Lee signed the Secrets Act and then retired from the RAF in 1946 with the rank of Flight Lieutenant, or Flight Lieutenant to we Americans. He received numerous campaign medals, including the Africa Star, Italy Star, and the Long Service and Good Conduct Medal, among others. Lee was offered his old job at Beecham's with a significant raise, but he turned it down. As he said, "I couldn't think myself back into the office frame of mind." Veterans educated in the classics were then sent by the military to teach at universities, but Lee took a different route. During lunch with his mother's cousin, Niccolo Carandini, now the Italian ambassador to Britain, Carandini said to him, "Why don't you become an actor, Christopher?" Lee liked the idea, but he had always considered taking the trade of an opera singer as he had a bass voice that many thought was pitch perfect. Although his mother was less than enthusiastic, Lee reminded her of the family's highly successful Carandini performers in Australia, which included his great-grandmother, Marie Carandini, who had also been an opera singer. Lee then met Niccolo's friend, Filippo del Giudice, a lawyer-turned-film producer and head of Two Cities Films, part of the Rank organization. Lee recalled that Giudice looked me up and down and concluded that I was just what the industry had been looking for. He was then sent to Joseph Samlo to sign a contract, and David Henley and Olive Dodds, all part of the same group, signed him on a 7-year contract to include acting lessons. Now Lee, who stood 6 foot 5 inches tall, said, "Initially I was told by Samlo I was too tall to be an actor. That's quite a fatuous remark to make. It's like saying you're too short to play the piano. I thought, right, I'll show you. At the beginning, I didn't know anything about the technique of working in front of a camera. But during those 10 years, I did the one thing that's so vitally important today. I watched, I listened, and I learned. So when the time came, I was ready, oddly enough, to play a character who said nothing, referring to his role of playing Frankenstein." Lee had always been enthralled by the J.R.R. Tolkien books, and he read the entire series and loved them. Recounting the time he met the author, Lee said, "I still think The Lord of the Rings is the greatest literary achievement in my lifetime. I met him quite by chance, really. I met him with a group of other people in a pub in Oxford he used to go to, the Eagle and Child. I was very much in awe of him, as you can imagine, so I just said, 'How do you do?'" Lee was the only Lord of the Rings cast member to actually have ever met Tolkien, who passed away in 1973, before several of the film's bigger stars had even been born. Like so many other people, I couldn't wait for the second and then the third book. Nothing like it had ever been written. From his film debut in 1948 until his death in 2015, Christopher Lee appeared in at least one film in every year of his career. His final film, The Hunting of the Snark, was released posthumously in 2016. Beside his many Dracula roles, he is also well remembered for playing Sherlock Holmes, as well as the Bond villain Francisco Scaramanga in The Man with the Golden Gun opposite Roger Moore. On that role, Lee said, "In Fleming's novel, he's just a West Indian thug, but in the film he's charming, elegant, amusing, lethal. I played him like the dark side of Bond." In 1977, Lee was sent to the USA for work, but he was afraid that he would be typecast in horror films, as had his friends Vincent Price and Peter Cushing, with both becoming horror film legends and with Cushing also landing the role of Moff Tarkin in the original Star Wars movie. Lee always brought his personal experience to his film roles. Years later, on the set of Lord of the Rings, director Peter Jackson attempted to direct a scene where Saruman is stabbed. Lee calmly corrected him. "Have you any idea what kind of noise happens when someone's stabbed in the back? Because I do." Lee had always considered his best performance to be when he played Pakistan's founder Muhammad Ali Jinnah in the biopic Jinnah in 1998. He also had many TV roles to his credit. But Lee's military service was not forgotten, and in 1997 he was appointed a commander of the Venerable Order of St. John. On June 16, 2001, he was appointed a commander of the Order of the British Empire for services to drama. Lee was also knighted for his military service, contributions to drama, and charity in 2009. In 2010, Lee received the Steiger Award in Germany and the BAFTA Fellowship in 2011. The French government made him a commander of the Ordre des Arts de Lettres in the same year. He was also awarded the BFI Fellowship in 2013. But Lee's career expanded far beyond the big screen. He sang background vocals for a few rock and roll and heavy metal groups starting in 2005 with the song Jingle Hell hitting the Billboard Hot Singles sales chart at number 22, making him the second oldest living performer to ever enter the music charts at 91 years and 6 months old. Later, the song rose to number 18, and this made Lee the oldest person to have a top 20 popular music hit. After living in Los Angeles for many years, he returned to England with his wife, since 1961, Danish-born Birgit Gitte Kronke. Lee died of heart failure on June 7, 2015, and was indeed a living legend. One fact that is least known about Christopher Lee was his dedication, both with his global contacts and personal finances, in hunting down fugitive Nazis. This particular occupation he never discussed, but it was a passion. Christopher Lee's life was one of rare authenticity, an actor whose gravitas came not from the stage but from the battlefield. Long before he became a knight of the screen, he was a soldier of shadows. It was said that his step-cousin, Ian Fleming, modeled his creation James Bond after him, as he was an intelligent man of myth, mystery, adventure, and unmatched courage.
During World War II, millions of Americans answered the call to serve, including some of Hollywood's already established and some rising stars. Back then, patriotism wasn't performative. It was personal. Fame could wait. The country came first. One of those men was Charles Durning. Before he was a Hollywood legend, Durning was just a terrified young man leaping off a boat into a hailstorm of bullets on Omaha Beach. He survived the bloodbath at Normandy, took shrapnel across his body, and may have escaped one of the worst massacres of the war. But when the war ended, his heroism was buried, lost in bureaucratic red tape and half-missing records. Hollywood would give him fame, but it nearly cost him his legacy. Who was Charles Durning? What did he do in World War II? What did he endure during the war that nearly killed him twice? How did America almost forget one of its greatest unsung heroes? What is his legacy in Hollywood?
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
Charles Edward Joseph Durning was born on February 28, 1923 in Highland Falls, New York. His father, James Durning, was an Irish immigrant who had been badly wounded in World War I, just as Charles would be in World War II. He died when Charles was 12. His mother, Louise Leonard, was of Irish descent. He grew up in the shadow of the United States Military Academy at West Point, where his mother worked as a laundress. The family struggled and had more than its share of tragedies. Out of the 10 children born to Louise and James Durning, 5 of them, all girls, died from smallpox and scarlet fever by 1940. All the Durning brothers survived and were natural-born fighters, and all would eventually serve in the military in World War II. Leaving home at 16, Charles worked in a munitions factory, worked on a slag heap, and in a barbed wire factory. Durning enlisted in the Army on January 17, 1943, and a month later was sent to a battery of the 386th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion, a coastal artillery outfit stationed at Camp Edwards in Massachusetts. After 4 months of training, his outfit was sent to Fort Polk, Louisiana, to take part in large-scale maneuvers, alongside other inexperienced outfits. That August, he was promoted to Private First Class. The unit arrived in England on February 18, 1944, in time to prepare for the invasion of France. Durning's battery would eventually be consigned to other organizations, broken up and scattered about on an as-needed basis once in a combat zone. But 2 weeks before the invasion on May 23rd, Durning and 12 others were transferred to Unit 2 Replacement Detachment 06 Echo of the 17th Replacement Depot. The need for infantrymen outweighed AAA necessities. Durning and others found themselves placed within the U.S. Army's 398th Infantry Regiment, 100th Infantry Division, and, in his own words, he said, "We were frightened all the time. My sergeant said, 'Are you scared, son?' And I said, 'Yes, I am.' And he said, 'That's good. It's good to be scared.' He said, 'We all are.'" Regarding his landing at Normandy, Durning stated, "This guy in the boat, he turned to me and he threw up all over me, and I got seasick. He was scared. You're not thinking about anything. You're just thinking about you hope that shell that just went off isn't going to hit this boat." Even the guys who had seen a lot of action before, and this was my first time, they were just as ashen as I was, and I was frightened to death. I was the second man off my barge when the first and third men got killed. The first guy died when the ramp went down. The guy fell and I tried to leap over him, and I stumbled and we both slipped into the water. We were supposed to be able to walk into shore, but they didn't bring us far enough. And I was in 60 feet of water with a 60-pound pack on, so I let it all go. I came up and I didn't have a helmet, a rifle, nothing. I hit the beach. The guys pulled me in who were already there. I'd lost everything, but they said, "You'll find plenty of them on the beach, rifles, helmets that belong to nobody." Nobody knew where we were supposed to go. There was nobody in charge. You were on your own. All around me, people were being shot at. I saw bodies all over the place, but you didn't know if they were alive or dead. They were just lying there. We got behind this tank to protect ourselves. We're holding our own when they called us over to them. I asked the sergeant, "You want me to go first or you go first?" He said, "You go first. I'll be right behind you." I heard an explosion and I turned around and his torso is there and his body was over there. Units that hit the beach on June 6, 1944 often took extremely high casualties, driving up the demand for replacements. In fact, over 70% of new soldiers were placed within infantry units to make up losses, and many were transferred from support units to fill the void, many times without proper infantry training. On June 15th, about 10 kilometers inland from Omaha Beach, Durning's company received incoming German artillery, which was covering a minefield, which detonated some of them. Shrapnel from one of the exploding anti-personnel mines threw shrapnel into him and another replacement soldier near him named Leo Forster, who lost his right arm. PFC Durning, Charles E., serial number 327-26378, was sent to the 24th Evacuation Hospital in Lecombe that afternoon with a severe concussion, multiple lacerations to the face, and fragmentation shrapnel wounds to the right frontal region of his head, left chest wall, both legs, left foot, knee, fingers, and hands. Durning's medical records later became fragmented as they were sent along with thousands of others to various field hospitals as they also moved toward the front. Likewise, his service record was incomplete following his discharge after the war. There are some discrepancies that should be addressed. Hospital records indicate that Durning was declared fit for full field duty on December 6, 1944. The disposition note reads, "Patient is now able to walk 12 miles without pack." But this really makes little sense, as no infantryman moves without his rucksack and basic load. His next engagement, resulting in his receiving more wounds and another Purple Heart, are somewhat vague. What also remains unknown is the unit Durning was shipped out to from the 10th Replacement Depot before the Battle of the Bulge, after he was released from the hospital. Durning answered a question during an interview. "The day I got out of the hospital, the Battle of the Bulge started, and everybody had to go up there. If you could pull a trigger, you had to go up. I got wounded twice up there and got the Silver Star, but I got out. I did the march to Malmedy when they killed over 200 prisoners." Durning does not appear on any roster of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion, which was the outfit massacred by the 1st Waffen-SS Panzer Division in Malmedy. But in the confusion of battle, soldiers often become separated from their parent unit and join with others. There was also the massacre of the Black Artillerymen at Vereth, near Malmedy, by the 1st SS Reconnaissance Detachment commanded by Gustav Knittel, under the command of the notorious Joachim Peiper. Please see our video on the Vereth massacre. Allied soldiers were not safe when captured, and there were many field executions conducted nearby, so Malmedy may have been the only location Durning remembered, as it was a major crossroad. According to one military website, the second time he was wounded states, Durning was stabbed 8 times by a bayonet-wielding teenage German soldier. That day he survived by killing the German with a rock in hand-to-hand combat. Durning recovered from these wounds and was released from the hospital just in time to fight in the Battle of the Bulge, where he was taken prisoner. However, the only combat wounds listed on a medical report filed just prior to his discharge are the shrapnel wounds from June of 1944. There are no bayonet wounds listed, but he was awarded a second Purple Heart and the Bronze Star as well, hence the confusion. No details were listed. Adding to the confusion, his action for which he was awarded the Silver Star still remains unknown, but the award is listed. Even more confusing is the absence of the word Ardennes from the battles and campaigns section on his discharge papers, implying that he missed the Bulge altogether. Reports after the war indicate that he was a rifleman in the 159th Infantry Regiment, which was a hastily formed unit that was sent in the last weeks of 1944. So dire was the manpower shortage, the ranks were filled with 1,100 air cadets, 1,500 men from other divisions still stationed in the United States, 2,500 from various disbanded units, and men combed out of the supply and quartermaster services. The rush of events threw them all together hastily, as some of them were still in processing mere weeks before the division itself departed for Europe, hardly a recipe for unit bonding or cohesion under fire. Many were used to reconstitute the regiments in the 106th Infantry Division that were completely destroyed during the battle, and many of the 7,000 surviving and wounded soldiers being captured, such as future author Kurt Vonnegut Jr. The 106th Infantry Division had just arrived a few days before, relieving the 2nd Infantry Division, and known as the Golden Lions, were under the command of Major General Alan W. Jones in the Ardennes Forest, which was so quiet and uneventful that the GIs had started calling it the Ghost Front. According to Kurt Vonnegut, we were a totally new division, and most of our soldiers had absolutely zero field experience. This was their first combat. When the Germans hit us, we were totally overwhelmed, outnumbered, freezing, hungry, and in no shape to fight back. I hardly got to know any of the men we received. The only way I came to know many of my fellow soldiers was when we were prisoners. It's entirely possible that Durning had been sent as a replacement, being one of the few men to have actual combat experience, as new green troops were ushered into the theater as replacements. Combat experienced men were highly valued and pulled from wherever they could be found, including hospitals. Durning was assigned to one of those companies after he was declared fit for duty, but the records don't indicate that he participated in the fighting in the Ardennes, although his assigned unit did. What is not in dispute were the medals that he was awarded, including the 3rd Purple Heart, which was awarded along with the Silver Star, which would have been the period that he was in the Ardennes. Private First Class Durning returned from the war in Europe with 5,000 other soldiers on a Liberty ship called the SS Samuel Adams, just after New Year's in 1946. He left Fort Dix, New Jersey on January 30th with an honorable discharge and $196 in mustering out pay. He was 23 years old and struggled with PTSD and survivor's guilt. At first, he felt that he had no direction in life, no purpose. Durning developed an interest in acting at the age of 28 while working as an usher in a theater. He was called on stage to replace a drunken actor who failed to arrive, and Durning said he was hooked when he first heard the audience laugh. He achieved initial success on Broadway and later in Hollywood that reflected his fighting spirit. Durning started getting guest appearances in early 1960s TV shows as well as minor roles over the next decade until he was cast as the cop, Lieutenant Snyder, hassling street grifter Robert Redford in the multi-award-winning mega hit The Sting in 1973. Durning and his first wife had 3 children before divorcing in 1972. In 1974, he married his high school sweetheart, Mary Ann Emilio, and shortly afterward was cast in the Billy Wilder production of The Front Page in 1974. And then he supported screen tough guy Charles Bronson in the suspenseful western Breakheart Pass in 1975 and played the police officer Sperm Whale Whalen in The Choir Boys in 1977. The versatile Durning is equally adept at comedic roles and demonstrated his skills as Doc Hopper in The Muppet Movie in 1979 and a feisty football coach in North Dallas 40, also in 1979. Durning appeared with his friend Burt Reynolds in several feature films, such as Sharky's Machine in 1981 and The Dancing Governor in The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas in 1982. His versatility also saw him continuing to work as a regular character on TV shows, such as Dr. Harlan Eldridge in the highly popular TV series Evening Shade in 1990. On par with his multitude of feature film roles, Durning had always been in high demand on television and had guest starred in Everybody Loves Raymond in 1996, Monk in 2002, and Rescue Me 2004. Durning received another Oscar nomination for his portrayal of a bumbling Nazi officer in Mel Brooks's To Be or Not to Be. He was also nominated for a Golden Globe as the harried police lieutenant in 1975's Dog Day Afternoon, starring Al Pacino. He won a Golden Globe as Best Supporting TV Actor in 1991 for his portrayal of John Honey Fitzgerald in the TV film The Kennedys of Massachusetts, and a Tony Award in 1990 as Big Daddy in the Broadway revival of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. He was the would-be suitor of Dustin Hoffman, posing as a female soap opera star in Tootsie, the infamous seller of frog legs in The Muppet Movie, and Chief Brandon in Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy. He played Santa Claus in 4 different movies made for television and was the Pope in the TV film I Would Be Called John, Pope John the 23rd. Other notable films included That Championship Season, The Front Page, The Hindenburg, Starting Over, Tough Guys, Home for the Holidays, Spy Hard, and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? His last on-screen appearance was in the 2012 film Scavenger Killers. Durning had a monumental career that included over 100 films and shows. He won a Tony Award for Best Actor and received 2 Academy Award nominations for Best Actor, 9 Emmy Award nominations, a Golden Globe Award for Best Actor, 4 Golden Globe nominations, and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Screen Actors Guild. During the war, he had earned the Silver Star, Bronze Star, 3 Purple Hearts, World War II Victory Medal, and the Combat Infantryman Badge. In 2008, he was awarded the French Legion of Honor for his participation in liberating France by Consul General of France Philippe Blériot. Charles Durning died on December 24, 2012 in Manhattan, New York City. He is survived by his children, Michelle Douglas and Janine. The family planned to have a private family service and burial at Arlington National Cemetery, where he is laid to rest. Charles Durning gave everything, blood, body, and soul. He left the war with medals, but carried home ghosts. Why did it take Hollywood to remember what his country almost forgot?
One of the most successful, well-known, and widely respected actors in film history was American actor Lee Marvin. Known for such iconic films as The Dirty Dozen, Paint Your Wagon, Bad Day at Black Rock, Cat Ballou, Mr. Roberts, The Big Red One, The Professionals, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, Donovan's Reef, M Squad, the TV show, The Caine Mutiny, Hell in the Pacific, and Emperor of the North. he was always in demand as an actor, with great box office attraction. When Lee Marvin died on August 29, 1987, of a heart attack in Tucson, Arizona, the newspapers, tabloid magazines, and TV news all covered his death and remarked about his long and amazing career. But many did not know that he was a United States Marine who served in the Pacific during World War II. Who was Lee Marvin? What was his military service during World War II? What was his legacy? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, a veteran of the United States Army and Marine Corps, former history professor, book author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. Lamont Waltman Marvin Jr., better known as Lee Marvin, was born on February 19, 1924, in New York City, the second son of his parents, Lamont and Courtney, and they had a full-time job controlling him as a youth. He had an older brother named Robert, who became a teacher and artist, who was named after their distant relative, Confederate General Robert E. Lee. Their father was a World War I veteran, a captain in the Army Corps of Engineers, and later a successful advertising executive. His mother, Courtney Washington, was a well-known fashion writer. Despite having a rather disciplined household, his boisterous manner and quick temper saw him kicked out of several boarding schools for his violent behavior, smoking cigarettes, truancy, and getting into fights. One of the reasons that he was such a poor student was that he suffered from dyslexia and ADHD, and he preferred spending his time in the Everglades of Florida, where his family moved after his father became advertising manager for the Florida Citrus Commission in 1940. He much preferred hunting game than attending classes, killing wild boars with a bamboo spear and stalking down pumas. Never one to back down from a fight despite the odds against him, he was once expelled for throwing his roommate out of a second-floor window, luckily avoiding criminal charges. His last stop was St. Leo's Catholic College Prep School in Florida, but he dropped out in 1942, but later returned so he could graduate. He wanted to join the Marine Corps. Marvin disregarded his father's objections to his joining the Marines, but after his brother Robert joined the Army Air Forces, Marvin himself enlisted on August 12, 1942 anyway. Ironically, both sons in the military, their father Lamont re-enlisted at age 51 and was sent to England, where he established anti-aircraft batteries, actually shooting down a few V-1 flying bombs and a couple of V-2 rockets. Lee Marvin went to boot camp at Parris Island, South Carolina Recruit Depot, and then went to New River, North Carolina Marine Corps Base. He excelled in boot camp and, thanks to his father's influence, made sharpshooter. He missed expert status by 1 point. He was promoted to corporal at New River, assigned to a service company at Camp Elliott near San Diego, California, and received instructions in demolition. He mastered combat training but was still rebellious, and some minor scrapes saw him reduced to private, confined to barracks, and assigned to a month of mess duties. Afterward, he was assigned as a quartermaster in D Company of the 4th Tank Battalion, 4th Marine Division, and then deployed to the Southwest Pacific, where he was assigned as one of the first Marine Corps Scout snipers, as that was yet to be designated as a military occupational specialty. They were later redesignated as the Reconnaissance Company. The snipers would be scattered throughout the division as needed. Marvin was directly involved in combat several times and participated in 21 landings on Japanese-occupied islands while serving as a member of 4th Marine Division. He reached the rank of corporal but was demoted again to private for an unknown infraction. Of particular interest, Marvin landed on the beaches of Eniwetok and Saipantinian, where most of the 4th Division was wiped out. Paddling in small rubber boats, Marvin and his comrades were sent in to reconnoiter Kwajalein on the night before the invasion early on Tuesday, February 1st, 1944. As he remembered, if you were fired on, you were supposed to throw a poncho over your head, whip out a blue flashlight, and draw an X on the map where the fire was coming from. Well, I don't think anybody actually threw a poncho over their head, and nobody fired back either, because once you fired, you were dead. Of course, we'd all get miserably lost and screwed up. The next morning, if you got that far, the sun would come up and there would be the whole U.S. Navy out there because it's D-Day. And they would be shelling you because if they saw you, they figured you were Japs and nobody told them otherwise. So, God, it was absolute confusion. You're hit by friend and foe. So, you eventually swim out to a reef and pray and hope, goddammit, that somebody's listening. The Marines captured Kwajalein on February 4th, and Marvin saw more action later that month. He and his comrades scouted Inuiatok before the landings by Marines and Army troops on Engebe and Perry Islands on February 18th and 19th. Marvin's luck held through several more missions before he was shipped to Maui, Hawaii, for leave. Upon his return, he was assigned to I Company, 3rd Battalion, 24th Marine Regiment, 4th Marine Division, preparing to invade Saipan, which was fiercely defended by 32,000 Japanese troops, and the month-long campaign was bitter and costly. Marvin's platoon led the penetration, and they ended up in an artillery kill zone, and it came down furiously. As he stated, "They had us nicely pinpointed on a checkerboard. They didn't miss. The artillery got very bad, and all the bombing was coming down real heavy." Casualties began to mount, but Marvin and his surviving comrades pushed forward and took shelter in a long trench. By the end of the day, the Marines and Japanese were only 30 yards apart. After killing dozens of Japanese in a series of suicidal banzai charges on Saipan, Marvin and only a few others from his platoon were still alive. In fact, the entire company had been reduced to 25% combat effectiveness. As the remaining men of I Company pushed up to secure the 1,554-foot limestone Mount Topachau on June 18, 1944, Marvin covered their advance with accurate sniper fire, picking off the Japanese snipers he could locate after they fired. But then the Japanese counterattacked, and he was hit by machine gun fire, opening a 9 by 3-inch gash, almost severing the spinal cord and severing his sciatic nerve. He was paralyzed at that time. As he continued crawling forward as best he could, one of the Japanese snipers he was hunting shot him in the foot. Marvin was placed on a stretcher, given a shot of morphine, and laid with the other wounded men. A few seconds later, after he had gulped some water from a plasma bottle, a captured Japanese ammunition dump 150 yards away exploded. The tremendous blast blew Marvin off his stretcher, and he landed squarely on his wounded backside. After over a year of medical treatment in naval hospitals, he was evacuated to the hospital ship USS Solace, and he spent 13 months in various naval hospitals, going through several surgeries. His prognosis did not look good. However, Marvin had determination, and he attacked rehabilitation therapy the same way he attacked life, head-on. But his wounds rendered him invalid for further military service. Lee Marvin received a Purple Heart, Navy Commendation Medal with V device, Combat Action Ribbon, Presidential Unit Citation, America Campaign Medal, Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, World War II Victory Medal, and he was medically discharged with the rank of Private First Class. After his medical discharge in July 1945, he and his father and brother returned, with their mother, back to Woodstock, New York. Marvin worked as a plumber's assistant at an upstate New York community theater. A neighbor would take him on fishing trips, and on one of these trips he met the manager of the nearby Maverick Theater. He sometimes stood in for sick actors during rehearsals, making $7 a week, and he discovered that he had a love and was told he had a talent for acting. He had learned that his wound to his spine would be painful as a reminder of his service for the rest of his life. Taking encouragement, he studied acting at the American Theater Wing using his GI Bill education benefits. He appeared in many off-Broadway productions such as Uniform of Flesh, which was the original version of Billy Budd in 1949. The latter play would see him perform that same role on Broadway in 1951. This play was performed at the Experimental Theater, where a few months later, Marvin also appeared in The 19th Hole of Europe, that same year until he was discovered by a director who suggested that he move to Hollywood, which he did in 1950, making his film debuts in You're in the Navy Now in 1951. That film saw the introduction of new actors Charles Bronson and Jack Warden. This required some filming in Hollywood, so Marvin decided to stay in California, and that same year he was in the film Teresa. Marvin always chose to take on tough guy roles in movies such as The Dirty Dozen, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and Sergeant Riker. Marvin won an Academy Award for his roles both as a drunken gunfighter and his evil twin brother in the Western comedy Cat Ballou in 1965. Perhaps his best friend, acting legend and fellow veteran Ernest Borgnine, worked together on several films, most notably The Dirty Dozen, Emperor of the North, and Bad Day at Black Rock opposite Spencer Tracy. In 1986, Marvin told a Leatherneck writer, "When I see a young Marine in the airport, I think about how this guy is getting his presence together. That boot camp is doing its job. There's a medal to him standing in the airport wearing that uniform with his rifle badge. Yeah, I guess I see myself." Lee Marvin was a lifelong Democrat in the John F. Kennedy mold, and he openly supported him during his presidential campaign. He was also very open-minded on social issues. In a 1969 Playboy magazine interview, Marvin said he supported gay rights. Marvin was a hard drinker and chain smoker, and was famous for always getting what he wanted from women to roles, and he never accepted surrender in any form. His longtime love interest was acting. When asked why he joined the Marines, he was quoted as saying, "I knew I was going to be killed. I just wanted to die in the very best outfit. There are ordinary corpses and Marine corpses. I figured on the first-class kind and joined up." Lee Marvin lived by a simple mantra. Life is every man for himself. You can't ever let your guard down, and the most useless word in the world is help. He was credited with making his action and war films more accurate by helping train young actors in the use of the World War II weapons that he himself was an expert on. He also instructed them on military mannerisms and methods. When Lee Marvin died, he was 63 years old, and he was buried with honors in Arlington National Cemetery. In this series, we profile celebrities who are veterans. Many served in wartime, others did not, but their military service should be noted. Many are household names even today, and have become legendary in the entertainment world. There is no bigger name in entertainment than Clint Eastwood. Whether from old black and white TV shows to feature films, he has been a powerhouse as an actor, director, and producer. Before he was Hollywood's toughest cowboy, before he stared down outlaws and Dirty Harry's most ruthless villains, Clint Eastwood faced a real-life battle for survival, plunging into the freezing Pacific Ocean after a military plane crash, swimming through shark-infested waters for miles just to live another day. His grit and determination weren't just movie magic. They were forged in the real world long before the cameras ever rolled. But how did this young Army recruit transform into one of the most legendary actors and directors of all time? This is the forgotten history of Clint Eastwood, soldier, survivor, and cinematic icon. Clint Eastwood always seemed to fit into each role quite comfortably, as if it were simply a natural thing to do. But he is a far more accomplished and complex character than most people realize. Who is Clint Eastwood? What did he do in the military? How did he become involved in film and TV? What are his accomplishments? What is his legacy? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. Clint Eastwood was born May 31st, 1930 in San Francisco, California, and had many jobs as a young man, such as delivering newspapers, stacking grocery shelves, and fighting forest fires. He had learned to become an expert swimmer and boxer and was always very athletic. He was drafted into the U.S. Army during the Korean War and sent to Fort Ord, California for basic training, during which time he became a swimming instructor at Fort Ord after graduating from basic training. Eastwood said, "Everybody got shipped to Korea except me. My name just didn't come up, so I figured I'd make the best of it and went up and talked to the captain. I said, 'Look, I'm only a private, but I think I can handle this swimming pool thing.'" He spent his evenings and weekends moonlighting as a bouncer at bars and clubs off base, as well as the enlisted club on base. His looks, height, and stature made him an imposing figure. But Clint Eastwood proved his resilience even further after he survived a plane crash while returning to California after a trip to visit his parents and his girlfriend in Seattle, Washington. Being in uniform, the 21-year-old Eastwood managed to get Space A on board a U.S. Navy AD-1Q Skyraider headed for Mather Air Force Base, Sacramento. He needed to catch that flight, otherwise he would have been late returning to base, which is not a good thing in the military. As Eastwood also said, in those days you could wear your uniform and get a free flight. On the way back, they had one plane, a Douglas AD, sort of a torpedo bomber of the World War II vintage, and I thought I'd hitch on that. During the flight, Eastwood and pilot Lieutenant Francis Coleman Anderson began to experience plane trouble. They ran into bad weather, with rain and a strong headwind. The back loading door flew open, increasing drag and instability, requiring Eastwood to rig it shut with wire, and then the plane's electronics, communication, avionics systems went out. As Eastwood continued, everything went wrong. Radios went out, oxygen ran out, and finally we ran out of fuel up around Point Reyes, California, and went into the ocean. So we went swimming. Without instrumentation, Lieutenant Anderson had no orientation, and the plane became lost in a fog bank several miles off the coast. And running out of fuel, he had no choice. With the fuel exhausted and without a radio to call out a mayday, Anderson just ditched the plane into the ocean. The two men exited the aircraft into the frigid waters of the Pacific, inflated 2 life rafts, and headed for shore. As the sun went down, they saw the plane sink below the surface before using their shoes to paddle toward the distant shore. They got separated and the waves knocked both men off their rafts, and they had to swim about 4 miles to land. But Anderson recovered his raft and made it to shore, but Eastwood did not, and every time he neared the shore, the waves would push him further out, and at one point the undertow nearly dragged him under. He pushed on, fighting the exhaustion and hypothermia, and eventually reached the shore. Eastwood made his way to an RCA radio station in Point Reyes. He was cold, dripping wet, and exhausted, so the workers there took care of him and warmed him up. The boy was dazed and in a state of shock, a radio operator at the station told the Daily Independent Journal. He could hardly speak. They pieced together his story and drove him to a Coast Guard station where he and Lieutenant Anderson, who had also survived the ordeal, reunited. Eastwood also said, "It was late October, November, very cold water. Found out many years later that it was a white shark breeding ground, but I'm glad I didn't know it at that time, or I'd have just died." During his time in the Army, he met and became friends with future fellow actors David Jansen, well known for his TV show The Fugitive, and his role as the journalist in The Green Berets, Martin Milner, famous for his role in the TV series Item 12, and Richard Long, well established for his TV role in the western The Big Valley. Eastwood was honorably discharged in 1953, and he used the GI Bill to fund his way through LA City College, where he studied drama. As with other actors, he began his career with smaller parts and eventually became one of Hollywood's most sought-after actors. In 1954, he signed a contract with Universal International. He picked up bit parts for a little more than a year before Universal terminated the contract, making his way for playing smaller roles for a few years. He had a small acting debut in an uncredited role in 1955 before being cast in Rawhide in 1958, where he played Rowdy Yates, which ran until 1965. When Rawhide star Eric Fleming declined to star in the Sergio Leone spaghetti western A Fistful of Dollars, that was Eastwood's chance. This started Eastwood's Man with No Name series of films and launched him into movie stardom. A Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, Hang 'em High, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly are icons of cinematic history. He made his directorial debut in 1971's Play Misty for Me, but nothing is as more iconic than his series of films where he played San Francisco police inspector Harry Callahan in such productions as Dirty Harry, The Enforcer, Sudden Impact, and The Deadpool, as well as Magnum Force. His diversity in roles as actor, director, and producer ranged from dramas to comedies, such as The Iger Sanction, Heartbreak Ridge, Gran Torino, Play Misty for Me, The Outlaw Josie Wales, The Bridges of Madison County, $1 Million Baby, Mystic River, Unforgiven, In the Line of Fire, and The Mule. To the comedy series where he shared the screen with the orangutan Clyde in the classics Any Which Way But Loose and Any Which Way You Can, but his list of accomplishments is endless. Eastwood's debut as a producer began in 1982 with 2 films, Firefox and Honky Tonk Man.
In 1985, Eastwood starred and directed in Pale Rider, which was the highest-grossing Western of the 1980s. Eastwood also composed music to many of his films, either through performing or composition. Eastwood's love of history saw him portray Korean War veteran Walt Kowalski in 2008's Gran Torino, which he also directed. Eastwood then also began adapting books for the big screen. His 2014 film American Sniper, starring Bradley Cooper, is loosely based on the events of Navy SEAL Chris Kyle, detailing his times in Iraq, and which was his memoir. And he split James Bradley's 2000 book, Flags of Our Fathers, into two films. The 2006 movie of the same name focuses on the American perspective of the Battle of Iwo Jima, while the follow-up, Letters from Iwo Jima, tells the story from the perspective of the Japanese. In 2016, Eastwood directed the film Sully, based on the memoir of commercial airline pilot Chesley Sullenberger, who safely landed an airliner in the Hudson River in 2009. Tom Hanks, who played the lead, believed Eastwood was the only man for the job. He almost died. He almost froze in the water, Hanks told The Hollywood Reporter. I mean, no one else but Clint could have or should have made this movie. Eastwood recalled his experience while working on the film, but said it didn't play a part in his decision to direct it. He said, "I definitely did think about it when I was shooting this. I'm probably the only director who's actually been in a water landing, but it had no bearing on me making this movie. I would have shot this movie anyway." Clint Eastwood has dedicated part of his life to helping many veterans organizations, such as the Gary Sinise Foundation. Sinise, a fellow actor, is known for his humanitarian work, particularly when it comes to retired U.S. service members and the disabled service members, and his organization is dedicated to honoring those veterans and their families. He and a few other celebrities even assisted former Green Beret and Vietnam veteran Bo Greitz when he approached Eastwood to help fund a mission to the region of Laos to look for missing in action. Clint Eastwood has earned 5 Academy Awards during his long career, as well as 5 Golden Globes, a Screen Actors Guild Award, and 5 People's Choice Awards. In 1996, Eastwood was a recipient of the AFI Life Achievement Award. In 2006, he received the Stanley Kubrick Britannia Award for Excellence in Film from the BAFTA. He was also awarded the National Medal of Arts in 2010, which is the highest such honor that can be given by the United States government. His career also saw a slight diversion when he ran for the office of mayor and was elected in his community of Carmel by the Sea on April 8, 1986, defeating incumbent Charlotte Townsend in a landslide victory of 2,166 votes to 799 votes. Being an activist, Eastwood ran for mayor to make changes, since Carmel only took up about 1 square mile of land and lacked a single street sign or mailbox, and a 1929 zoning law even banned the sale of ice cream cones. He was tired of the Democrat-run bureaucracy. His nonpartisan campaign focused on overturning similar antiquated ordinances such as these. Eastwood turned his focus toward protecting the environment, as well as building a parking lot, a library annex, public restrooms, and beach walkways. Eastwood had wanted to build on his own property, and he followed through on his campaign promise and approved an application for an ice cream parlor and building that parking lot. Although Eastwood only served a single 2-year stint as mayor, his involvement in politics did not end there. In 2001, Governor of California Gray Davis appointed him to the California State Park and Recreation Commission. Later, fellow actor turned politician Arnold Schwarzenegger reappointed Eastwood for the role again in 2004. Before leaving politics for good, Eastwood delivered a speech at the 2012 Republican National Convention, which was his last major political forum. From a young soldier who defied death in the open sea to a Hollywood icon who redefined the American hero, Clint Eastwood's journey has been nothing short of legendary. His resilience, talent, and fearless pursuit of storytelling have left an undeniable mark on cinema, inspiring generations of filmmakers, actors, and audiences alike. In fact, Clint Eastwood has appeared in, produced, or directed some of the biggest and most impactful movies in the last 60 years. Whether he was out drawing outlaws, enforcing the law as Dirty Harry or directing films that challenged and redefined history, Eastwood has always embodied the essence of perseverance and excellence. He remains a living testament to what it means to carve out your own legacy, one bulletproof role, one groundbreaking film, and one unforgettable moment at a time. Clint Eastwood isn't just a Hollywood legend, he is an American institution. Clint Eastwood, the living legend, will soon be 95 years of age, and few can compare to him. He was the king of Hollywood, box office gold, and a face known across the world. He served in World War II with genuine courage and patriotism, but due to his age, he was not required to serve, being over 40. By 1942, he was living the American dream, was an Academy Award-winning actor, national heartthrob, and married to Carole Lombard, considered Hollywood's beloved funny girl. World War II was unique in that celebrities from every nation joined the militaries of their respective countries, Allied and Axis, and the United States led the world with the greatest number of highest-profile celebrities volunteering to serve in uniform. Here we examine one in great detail. Who was Clark Gable? Why was he famous before the war? Why did he enlist? What did he do during the war? What made him unique? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. William Clark Gable was born on February 1, 1901 in Cadiz, Ohio. His father, William Henry Will Gable, was an oil well driller who was Methodist, and his mother, Adeline, was Catholic. Gable was 6 months old when he was baptized as a Roman Catholic in the church in Denison, Ohio. His mother died when he was 10 months old, and his father refused to raise him as a Catholic, but rather as a Methodist Sunday school teacher. He decided that was the way to go, which created strains with his mother's late family, the Herschelmans. Gable's father then married Jenny Dunlap in April 1903. There was finally an agreement reached when his father agreed to allow young Clark to spend time with his uncle Charles Herschelman and his wife on their working farm in Vernon Township, Pennsylvania. Gable's new stepmother raised him to be well-dressed and well-groomed. She played the piano and gave him lessons, and Gable also took up brass instruments, becoming the only boy in the Hopedale Men's Town Band at age 13. Gable was mechanically inclined and repaired cars with his father, who demanded that he engage in masculine activities such as hunting and hard physical work. But Gable also loved literature, and he would recite Shakespeare among trusted company, particularly the sonnets. His father had financial difficulties in 1917 and decided to try his hand at farming and moved the family to Palmyra Township near Akron, Ohio. His father insisted that he work the farm, but Gable dropped out of high school at age 16 and soon found work in Akron working for the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company. This was when he saw the play Bird of Paradise and decided to become an actor. And he worked his way in by taking an unpaid job with a theater company. But his dream was temporarily derailed when his stepmother died in 1919, and he went to help his father work in the oil fields of Oklahoma. Finally, after 3 years, he left and joined a traveling theater company, which after going bankrupt left him stranded in Montana. He hitchhiked to Oregon and joined another theater company, where he met the theater's stage manager, Josephine Dillon. Dillon was a former actress and well-regarded theater teacher, 17 years older than Gable. She became his acting coach and paid to have his teeth fixed and his hair and eyebrows styled. Before long, they were married and they moved to Hollywood, California. Gable took work as an extra in several films and then returned to doing theater work. Later, they divorced. Gable was initially rejected during screen tests because casting agents thought his ears were too big for him to be a leading man, but he landed his first speaking role in The Painted Desert in 1931. After that, MGM offered him a contract, and his first leading role was in Dance Fool's Dance with Joan Crawford.
Gable and the film were well received, and the studio began casting him as a roughneck villain opposite newcomers such as Jean Harlow, Greta Garbo, and Norma Shearer. By 1932, he had been in a dozen films and launched his career as a leading man. But Gable grew tired of playing the bad guy villains and thugs and wanted other roles. By the late 1930s, Gable was one of America's leading actors, starring in many films such as Boomtown, San Francisco, and Mutiny on the Bounty, but his most memorable role was in 1939's Gone with the Wind.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Opposite English actress Vivien Leigh. This film would later put a price on his head. Clark Gable and actress Carole Lombard met while acting opposite each other in 1932's No Man of Her Own, when Clark was 31 and still married to Houston socialite Maria Langham, his second wife. Lombard herself was just 24 and in an unhappy marriage herself with actor William Powell. During a break from filming with Gone with the Wind, the two eloped and were married in Arizona in 1939 after Lombard's divorce was final, as was Gable's. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, many Hollywood stars joined the war effort, such as James Stewart and Sterling Hayden, who enlisted. Carole Lombard sent a telegram to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt on behalf of Clark Gable, expressing his interest in enlisting, but FDR thought the 41-year-old actor would best serve by increased patriotic roles in movies and bond drives, which Lombard tirelessly began doing along with other celebrities. Sadly, she was a passenger on Transcontinental and Western Air Flight 3 with her mother, press agent Otto Winkler, including 15 servicemen en route to training in California. She had just finished her 57th movie, To Be or Not to Be, and was on her way home from a successful war bond selling tour when on January 16, 1942, her DC-3 crashed at Mount Potosi, Nevada, killing all aboard. Gable was devastated by her loss. Clark Gable received a personal note of condolence from President Roosevelt, and the Civil Aeronautics Board investigation into the crash concluded that pilot error was the cause. After he finished filming Somewhere I'll Find You, he enlisted as a private in the U.S. Army Air Corps on August 12, 1942, after MGM, which had resisted releasing him under pressure, agreed to do so. He followed fellow actor James Maitland Stewart in the Air Service, and see our video on James Stewart. Many other actors had already enlisted, such as Sterling Hayden, as we mentioned, and Ronald Reagan, who was also in the U.S. Army Air Corps, later the U.S. Army Air Forces. The commanding general of the U.S. Army Air Forces, Henry H. Hap Arnold, offered Gable a special assignment with the 1st Motion Picture Unit following basic training. But Gable was the biggest name of all, and next to Jimmy Stewart was a great celebrity. He had won the Academy Award for Best Actor for his role in Frank Capra's It Happened One Night in 1934, and earned nominations in the same category for portraying Fletcher Christian in Frank Lloyd's Mutiny on the Bounty in 1935, and again nominated when he played Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind in 1939. And previous mentions and nominations for Call of the Wild in 1935, Hold Your Man in 1933, China Seas in 1935, Wife vs. Secretary in 1936, Saratoga in 1937, San Francisco in 1936, Boomtown in 1940, and Test Pilot in 1938. He was the greatest money-making actor in the world. His total salary for Gone with the Wind was $117,917, or about $2.8 million in today's dollars. But Gable was already well known as a rebel, and he was seriously against racial prejudice. Gable almost walked off the set when he discovered the studio facilities were segregated and signs were posted white and colored while filming Gone with the Wind. Gable phoned the film's director, Victor Fleming, and told him, "If you don't get those signs down, you won't get your Rhett Butler." The signs were then taken down. Due to segregation, Gable tried to boycott the premiere of Gone with the Wind in Atlanta because black actors Hattie McDaniel and Butterfly McQueen were not permitted to attend. McDaniel was refused admittance despite the fact that she had won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress in Gone with the Wind, becoming the first African-American actor to win an Oscar. Hattie had become good friends with Gable and persuaded him to go regardless, and they remained lifelong friends until her death in 1952. The national press releases went wild with the story of Gable's enlistment, just as they had with James Stewart. The Star reported, Mr. Gable, it was learned from a source outside the War Department, conferred with Lieutenant General H. Arnold, head of the Air Forces, yesterday. It was understood that Mr. Gable, if he is commissioned, will make movies for the Air Forces. Lieutenant Jimmy Stewart, another actor in uniform, has been doing this. Like Reagan and Stewart, he would make recruiting films for the service, but like Stewart, there would be a twist. Gable met with Arnold, who was one of his fans, and had requested officers' candidate school despite not having a high school diploma. But after passing his examinations, he was approved, and he attended the course USAAF OCS Class 42-E at Miami Beach, Florida. Due to his age, he was denied pilot training, and MGM arranged for cinematographer Andrew McIntyre to enlist with him and accompany him through training. Just taking that footage was enough propaganda gold for the recruiting effort. Gable graduated with high marks and was commissioned as a second lieutenant. Both Gable and McIntyre completed training on October 28, 1942, and both were commissioned as second lieutenants. Gable ranked 700 in his class of about 2,600 students, and they chose Gable to be the graduation speaker. General Arnold presented the cadets with their commissions and informed Gable of his special assignment. He was to make recruiting films in combat with the 8th Air Force to recruit aerial gunners. Gable then trained as an aerial gunner, which was highly unusual since gunners were normally enlisted men. Officers were navigators, bombardiers, and pilots, but he was very good at it. Service in the Air Corps, like submarine duty or parachute duty, was totally voluntary, so Gable and McIntyre were immediately sent to flexible gunnery school at Tyndall Field, Florida, followed by a photography course at Fort George Wright, Washington State, and they both were promoted to first lieutenant upon completion. On January 27, 1943, Gable and McIntyre reported to Biggs Army Airfield, Texas, to train with the 351st Bomb Group headed to England, with Gable assigned as head of a 6-man motion picture unit. Screenwriter John Lee Mann was also recruited, along with camera operators Sergeants Mario Totti and Robert Bowles, and soundman Lieutenant Howard Voss to complete his crew. Gable and his team had free rein and answered only to Hap Arnold, and Gable was promoted to captain while he was in the 351st Bomb Group at Pueblo Army Air Base, Colorado, a rank commensurate with his position as a unit commander. Gable's arrival in England received the same sort of paparazzi treatment as Jimmy Stewart had received. According to Pamela Churchill Harriman, when Clark Gable arrived, it was the talk of all London. Our biggest stars knew him, such as Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier. He was invited to every large party being thrown, but he rarely attended. He was really dedicated to his work. The 351st Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force arrived at RAF Polbrook, England, in 1943. Gable was scheduled to fly only 5 missions with a cameraman on board shooting war footage, including one mission to Germany as an observer gunner in a B-17 Flying Fortress between May 4th and September 23, 1943. Gable's first combat mission was on May 4th, 1943, when Gable joined the 351st Group Commander, Lieutenant Colonel William A. Hatcher, on a late afternoon familiarization mission before the unit became fully operational. Flying Squadron Lead with Captain William R. Calhoun of the 303rd Bomb Group, RAF Molesworth, against the Ford and General Motors plants at Antwerp, Belgium. Hatcher and Gable's B-17 was nicknamed the 8-Ball Mark II, serial number 41-24635. Gable himself suffered a minor case of frostbite from wearing leather gloves in the extreme cold while manning the 50 caliber machine gun. Gable's second mission was on July 10, 1943, and he flew with Second Lieutenant Theodore Agaropoulos of the 351st 508th Bomb Squadron in Argonaut 3, serial number 42-29851, to bomb the airfield at Villacoublay, France, the home of the Luftwaffe's famous JG-26. The mission was incomplete due to clouds obscuring the target area, which forced the bombers to return without dropping their ordnance. However, they did have a visit from JG-26, but did not prevent German fighter attacks. Despite this, only one bomber was damaged and no losses, and only one man was wounded on another bomber. His third combat mission occurred on July 24, 1943, again in Argonaut 3 as the lead aircraft of the 351st, with Group Executive Officer Lieutenant Colonel Robert W. Burns. The mission to bomb the Norsk hydrochemical plants in Herøya, Norway, part of Hitler's heavy water program to build an atomic bomb, saw no enemy action, but it was the longest 8th Air Force mission to that date. Only one bomber was damaged by flak. On the morning of August 12, 1943, Gable's fourth mission was to bomb a synthetic oil plant at Gelsenkirchen in the Ruhr, joining 351st Operations Officer Major Theodore Ross Milton and Captain John B. Carraway's crew in Ain't It Gruesome, serial number 42-29863. Bombing Bochum, Germany, was a target of opportunity in bad weather. Gable's most experienced crew in the 8th Air Force most dangerous mission to date, with 23 of its 330 B-17s shot down and 2 others scrapped upon return. Gable's B-17 was damaged by flak and attacked by fighters, which shot out one of the engines and the vertical stabilizer. Gable wedged himself behind the top turret gunner for a better view as German fighters, FW-190s and Me-109s, made 5 passes at his formation. Then the flak came up, and a shell blew through the fuselage, killing 1 man with 2 others being badly wounded. Gable worked to apply first aid as best he could to the 2 wounded men until the fighters reappeared on the return leg after the bomb run. During this next attack, an explosive 20mm shell came up through Ain't It Gruesome's flight deck and tore the heel from Gable's boot and exited just above his head without exploding. Afterward, the crew noticed the 15 holes in the aircraft, and Gable noticed that his boot was missing its heel. Although none of the 351st Fortresses went down, 11 suffered battle damage. 1 crash-landed on return, and the group's crew suffered 1 killed, the man on Gable's bomber, and 7 wounded, including the other 2 on Ain't It Gruesome. After landing, he was swarmed by reporters grilling him, but Gable said, "I didn't know what happened. I didn't know anything about it until we had dropped 11,000 feet and could get off oxygen and look around. Only then did I see the hole in the turret." When MGM found out about the scenario, the studio executives asked Arnold to reassign its most valuable screen actor to non-combat duty. Gable's last mission was an early morning strike to the port area of Nantes, France, on September 23, 1943. He flew with Lieutenant Colonel Burns and the 510th Bomb Squadron commanded by Major John Blaylock, leading the 351st in the Duchess, serial number 42-29925. Half of the 6 groups assigned failed to assemble in bad weather, and intercepting fighters inflicted extensive battle damage to the other half, damaging 16 bombers, but no bombers were lost. Gable left his film crew in the waist of the bomber and manned a gun in the nose. But Gable had been secretly flying far more missions that were not authorized, and these were never recorded in his logbook. This was dangerous for Gable, and not just because of the flak and fighters, because the news of one of Hollywood's greatest film stars flying over Europe was well known to the Germans. Adolf Hitler and most of the Third Reich hierarchy admired both Gable and Jimmy Stewart, and again see our video on him, and Hitler's girlfriend and future wife, Eva Braun, was enamored with Gable. Her favorite film was Gone with the Wind, which she watched many times with Magda Goebbels, wife of propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, and others in the private theater in the Berghof. Generalleutnant or Major General Hans Bauer, a World War I ace himself and Hitler's personal pilot, was often present when films were played. During his interview, he said, "James Stewart and Clark Gable were very popular in Germany, and their films were translated into German and shown in cinemas. Once it was known that Stewart was flying, Goering himself placed a 100,000 mark price on his head, hoping that he would be captured. This was because Goering already knew Lindbergh, who was a fellow aviator like Stewart. I understood this curiosity being a pilot myself, but when it was learned that Gable was also flying, that piqued Eva Braun's interest, as he was her favorite actor. So, not to be outdone by Goering, Hitler also offered 100,000 marks to any pilot who shot down his bomber. Both men would have been treated as honored guests had they been captured. SS Sturmbannführer, or Major Otto Gunsche, alternated from frontline combat service to serving as Hitler's adjutant several times and was also his bodyguard. His comments are interesting. When I returned to Berlin, I was with Hitler, Brown, and others, and once again they were watching Gone with the Wind. Every time Clark Gable appeared on screen, she would shriek, "There he is," like a silly child. Personally, I never saw the attraction.
That's what's wrong with you.
Captain Clark Gable was awarded the Air Medal on October 4th, 1944 for completing 5 combat missions, and later the Distinguished Flying Cross. Gable was still sneaking aboard B-17s until he was given a direct order not to leave the ground in October 1944. Gable left the 351st on November 5, 1943, returning to the U.S. with over 50,000 feet of 16mm color film covering the air war. In 1944, the film, Combat America, narrated by Gable, was shown in theaters. Gable's departure made everyone breathe easier, as stated by General James H. Doolittle, who said he, meaning Stewart, was willing to give all that up to continue flying. Same with Clark Gable, both of whom I knew well. Both men received their orders home from much higher authority. Given who they were, I did not even think about petitioning for their extensions, as that would have been career suicide. I could see it now, either Stewart or Gable getting shot down, captured, or killed, and the newspapers back home saying, "Doolittle kills movie stars" on the front page. We knew that Hitler had placed bounties on both their heads. Gable returned to the United States to edit his film on an old Warner Brothers lot donated to the war effort, and he was assigned to the 18th Ermey Air Force Base Unit Motion Picture Unit at Culver City, California, where other stars contributed with any film equipment they had as well. In June 1944, Gable was promoted to major, and he hoped for another combat assignment, but he had been placed on inactive reserve status. On June 12, 1944, his discharge papers were signed by Captain, later U.S. President, Ronald Reagan. Gable was a conservative Republican. In 1944, Gable became a member of the Conservative Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, a group created to help root out communists from the film industry. Other members included such industry heavyweights as Walt Disney, Ayn Rand, Ronald Reagan, and John Wayne, and they helped create and enforce the Hollywood blacklist, often testifying under oath before House Un-American Activities committees. Gable completed editing the film Combat America in September 1944, giving the narration himself, and making use of numerous interviews with enlisted gunners as focus of the film. The film debuted in theaters in 1945. With the war over, Gable slowly returned to making movies, and due to his hectic production schedule, it was impossible for him to continue his military duties, so he resigned his commission on September 26, 1947, just a week after the Air Force became an independent service branch. Gable was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal, American Campaign Medal, European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal, and World War II Victory Medal. Others who knew him for many years all agreed that Gable, like Stewart, who had seen far more combat time and trauma, was never the same man after the war. In 1949, Gable married English model and actress Sylvia Ashley, the widow of Douglas Fairbanks, but they divorced in 1952. He retired to his ranch, awaiting more roles, and after a long series of unsuccessful but high-profile relationships with a list of women longer than his film credits, he married his 5th wife, Kay Spreckles, in 1955. She was a former fashion model and actress and previously married 3 times. Gable became stepfather to her son, Bunker Spreckles, who developed a somewhat notorious celebrity lifestyle in the late 1960s and early 1970s surfing scene, which led to his early death in 1977. The film, Run Silent, Run Deep, was released in 1958 with co-star and producer Burt Lancaster and received good reviews, which led to Gable receiving television offers, but he rejected all of these. At age 57, Gable said, "Now it's time I acted my age." But his health began to deteriorate due to a heart ailment, and his new contracts included a clause that his workdays on a set ended at 5 p.m. On February 8, 1960, Gable received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame for his work in motion pictures. His last film was The Misfits, opposite Marilyn Monroe, which was released in 1961. But in early November 1960, he was hospitalized with a heart attack. By the morning of November 16th, he seemed to be improving, but he died that evening at the age of 59 from a second heart attack caused by an infection. The medical staff did not perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation for fear that the procedure would rupture Gable's heart, and a defibrillator was not available. His funeral service included Hollywood's elite, as well as a military honor guard, and his pallbearers included Spencer Tracy and James Stewart. Clark Gable was interred in the Great Mausoleum Memorial Terrace at Glendale's Forest Lawn Memorial Park next to his late wife Carol Lombard and her mother. 22 years later, Kay Gable died and was interred there as well. 4 months after his 1960 death, Kay Gable gave birth to his only son, John Clark Gable, but he did have a daughter out of wedlock with actress Loretta Young much earlier. During his career, Clark Gable appeared in more than 60 motion pictures in a career that lasted 37 years, most as the leading man. Whether in the air or behind the camera or in front of the camera, he was a Hollywood legend.
Grainy film flickers across the screen. A lone fighter stands in a courtyard. Dozens of men surround him. No weapons, guns, or armor. Just fists. They rush him all at once. Bodies drop, one after another. The crowd cheers. Because in this world, the heroes always win. 1970s Kung Fu cinema didn't sell realism. It sold something better. Invincibility. Men who couldn't be beaten. Fighters who felt untouchable. Legends built on screen. Then, something unusual happened. One of those legends stepped off the screen and into real life. A fighter who didn't need choreography or camera tricks. His name was Chuck Norris. He fought in real tournaments and kept winning until the line between reality and performance started to blur. Because years later, something else took hold. Not in a ring or a movie, but on the internet. A different kind of arena, where stories spread faster than truth and facts stopped mattering. Chuck Norris became something new. Not just a fighter and an actor, he became a force. People used his name like a punchline and a warning. A man who could roundhouse kick the laws of physics. A man who didn't follow reality because reality followed him. And the strangest part, millions of people who had never seen him fight or even watched his movies still believed it. So how does a real man turn into something larger than life? And when the myth takes over, what happens to the truth? Let's try to find out.
Hello, I'm Mike Droberg, Marine Corps veteran and filmmaker, and we will try to answer these questions on today's episode of Forgotten History.
The beginning of the toughest 26 days in Marine Corps history.
With confidence in our armed forces.
The 36th President of the United States died this afternoon.
Come, there are children and women in here, and to call it off.
Before the movies and the jokes, there was a kid from Oklahoma, Carlos Ray Norris. Chuck was born on March 10th, 1940. His father, Ray Norris, drifted in and out of his life battling alcoholism. His mother, Wilma, held the family together as best she could. He had two younger brothers. His brother Wieland would later die in Vietnam, a loss that stayed with Chuck for the rest of his life. His brother Aaron became a stuntman, director, and would eventually go on to work besides him in Hollywood. The family moved often. Stability never stuck. By his own account, Norris was quiet. Not the toughest or the most confident. Just another kid trying to find direction. That changed when he enlisted in the Air Force. He was looking for structure, and while stationed in South Korea, he found it in martial arts. At first, it was just training. Then it became routine. Then, something deeper. Discipline turned into obsession. Hours became days. Days turned into years. His techniques sharpened. His speed improved. And then his confidence followed. He spent 4 years in the Air Force and came back with a discipline that would shape everything. When Norris returned to the United States, he brought that discipline with him. He opened karate schools, started competing, and then he started winning consistently. Tournament circuits across the country against skilled fighters and experienced opponents. It didn't matter. Norris kept stacking the victories until eventually he reached the point few fighters ever do. A world champion. 7 consecutive titles. He held the top spot and no one took it from him. In the end, he had 183 wins with 10 losses and 2 draws during his career. That part gets overlooked because when people hear the name Chuck Norris, they think of jokes, memes, over-the-top stories that sound ridiculous. But before any of that, there was a period where his reputation came from something simple. If you stepped in the ring with him, you're probably gonna lose. And that reputation started to spread. Not through the internet or viral clips. Those things didn't exist yet. His reputation came through first-hand accounts, through fighters, in training gyms, which is how his name reached someone else. A rising martial artist who was about to change cinema forever. A man named Bruce Lee. And one meeting between them would shift everything, from real-world dominance to something the world could watch. Lee wasn't looking for actors. He wanted fighters. Men who could move on camera without faking it. Men who understood timing, distance, and impact. That search led him to Chuck Norris. The two had already crossed paths in training circles. There was a mutual respect already. Both understood what the other could do. So, Lee offered him a role. Not as a background extra, but as the final boss fight in Way of the Dragon. Rome, the Colosseum. 2 fighters step into an empty arena. They circle, test distance, adjust rhythm. This didn't feel like the other fights audience were used to. No wild swings or exaggerated reaction. Just precision. Lee studies him. Norris adapts. The pace shifts. The strikes land cleaner. The tension builds. For a moment, it feels uncertain. Then Lee finds the opening, and the fight ends. But something changes. That scene didn't just showcase Bruce Lee. It introduced Chuck Norris to the world. From there, Hollywood took over. And the man who built his name on real competition started living inside a different system. Movies turned him into a symbol. Missing in Action, Delta Force, and Lone Wolf McQuade, to name a few. Then, television expanded his legend. Walker, Texas Ranger. A show where he starred as a lawman and a protector. A figure who always restored order, week after week, episode after episode. His image grew. Until eventually, it stopped being about what he had done and started becoming something else. A version of Chuck Norris that didn't come from the ring or the screen, but from somewhere no one in Hollywood could control: the internet. And what happened next, no one saw coming. Early internet forums, message boards, jokes passed around between strangers. Simple lines at first. Jesus can walk on water, Chuck Norris can swim through land. Chuck Norris counted to infinity, twice. Chuck Norris doesn't sleep, he waits. They weren't meant to be taken seriously. That wasn't the point. The point was escalation. Each joke tried to go further than the last, more absurd, more impossible. And for some reason, people kept sharing them. What began as a small thread turned into something bigger. Websites dedicated to the jokes. Lists that grew into the hundreds, then thousands. Entire communities built around one idea. Chuck Norris was unstoppable. A symbol of absolute dominance. Most celebrities would have ignored it. Some would have tried to shut it down. But Norris leaned into it. He allowed the joke to grow, even participated in it. Books were published. Merchandise followed. The name became a brand built on exaggeration. And the line between reality and fiction kept fading. Because a new generation was coming up. People who had never seen his fights, never watched his films. For them, Chuck Norris wasn't a person with a career. He was a punchline. The legend came first, the man came second. And over time, that version started to replace everything that came before it. The champion, the disciplined martial artist. All of it compressed into a single idea, invincible. Chuck Norris stepped into that space on his own terms. He spoke openly about his Christian faith, wrote about discipline, responsibility, and belief. He showed up in public conversations that went beyond entertainment. He went on columns, interviews, and had campaign appearances. He backed political candidates like Mike Huckabee. He spoke about the direction of the country, pushed for a return to traditional family values. For some, that made him more respected. For others, it made him a target. Then came a moment that followed him for years. During the 2008 election, Norris warned the country could face 1,000 years of darkness if Barack Obama was elected. The comments spread fast. Clips replayed it, headlines picked it up. Critics mocked it, and supporters defended it. Maybe he was a prophet after all. But just like that, the man who had already been turned into a myth was now pulled into something else. Politics. The reaction didn't slow him down. He kept speaking, showing up, reinforcing the image people already had in their minds. A man of conviction. A man who didn't bend easily. At the same time, the other version of him kept growing. The jokes never stopped. They spread across generations. Kids who had never seen his fights still knew his name, still repeated the lines and treated him like something more than human. Two versions moving at the same time. The real man and the idea of him. One built on years of discipline, the other built on exaggeration. And for a long time, they existed side by side until time did what it always does. Chuck was aging. The appearances became less frequent. The roles slowed down. The spotlight shifted, but the legend stayed. Because legends don't need to show up to remain visible. They live in memory, in the stories people keep telling. And then, sadly, on March 19th, 2026, Chuck Norris died at the age of 86. The man who once stood at the top of a real fighting world, who crossed into Hollywood and turned the internet into something larger than life, was gone. And what remains now is a strange kind of legacy, something harder to define. A person who lived long enough to watch himself become a myth. And in the end, most people won't remember his record, the years of discipline, or the path it took to get there. They'll remember the version of him that couldn't be beaten, a version that never needed proof, and the version that still exists. Every time someone repeats the joke, he's remembered. And that's fine by me. I want to remember the unstoppable, legendary Chuck Norris. History remembers what happened. The world remembers what it believes. But Chuck Norris became far more. Let us know your thoughts about Chuck Norris in the comments below.
But you know, in the movies, whenever a crowd of like 50 guys surrounds someone like you in a movie, the guy comes at you one at a time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's true.
That's true.
It's like 15 guys surround you and they've got lead pipes and everything.
Well,
then they come at you one at one and it's just like...
That's the only way you can win.
Yeah, but if we have 200 people here tonight. If they all rushed right now, we could take him. Just all together.
Well, I feel sorry for the first three guys. First three guys might not be in good shape.
Right.
But, no,
maybe that's it.
Thank you for watching Forgotten History. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you have any comments or show ideas, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks again.